platform party.
Yeah, okay. Conference. We have a slightly revised timetable this afternoon, which I'll explain to you shortly. But before that, we have a special guest speaker, and I'd now like the fantastic Kate Osmore MP to introduce her. Thank you.
Good afternoon, conference. My name is Kate Osmore, and I'm absolutely honoured as your Shadow Secretary of State for International Development to introduce to you this year's international guest speaker. This year, more than ever, it matters that we stand up for our party's values on internationalism. The world and its crisis are more deeply connected than ever before. But the Tories want to turn inwards and cut themselves off from the world. They want to change the aid rules and divert money meant for the world's poorest to wealthier British overseas territories. They are abandoning our role in the world and reputation that goes with it. And when the world most needs bridges across the pond, Donald Trump wants to build only walls. Last week, he dared to tell world leaders at the United Nations that it's every country for itself. Well, conference, I'm not buying that, and I think we're better than that. Conference, when we look beyond our borders, we face a stark choice. Britain can bury its head in the sand, or we can set about the serious and difficult work of making this world a better, fairer place. Well, conference, I know what I choose. I choose tackling inequality and climate change. I choose making the rules of the game fairer. I choose showing more solidarity and justice to those around the world not as well off as us. I choose building a world, and not just a country, that is for the many, not the few. Our path, our choice, may not be an easy one, but it is the path the Labour Party will take. Conference, our speaker today has courage, ambition, and solutions in spades. She is an award-winning Canadian author and journalist who has done more than virtually anyone else to call out the root causes of global climate change, inequality and poverty around the world. Through international bestsellers like No Logo, The Shock Doctrine, and most recently, No Is Not Enough, she has inspired a generation to see the world differently and to work together for change. She's also an activist. She is a key organiser behind Canada's LEAP manifesto and has been a powerful voice for global justice in countless other countries. I know she is a true ally in our movement. Conference, I'm delighted to introduce to you this year's guest speaker, Naomi Klein.
Thank you, Kate, for that lovely introduction and for all of the work that you do to put social justice on the world agenda. It has been such a privilege to be part of this historic convention, to feel its energy and optimism. Because, friends, it's bleak out there. How do I begin to describe a world so upside down? From heads of state tweeting threats of nuclear annihilation, to whole regions rocked by climate chaos, to thousands of migrants drowning off the coasts of Europe, to openly racist parties gaining ground, most recently and alarmingly in Germany. Most days, there is simply too much to take in. So I want to start with an example that may seem small against such a vast backdrop. The Caribbean and the southern United States are in the midst of an unprecedented hurricane season, pounded by storm after record-breaking storm. As we meet, Puerto Rico, hit first by Irma, then Maria, is without power and could be for months. Its water and communication systems are also severely compromised. 3.5 million US citizens on that island are in desperate need of their government's help. But just like during Katrina, the cavalry is missing in action. Donald Trump is too busy trying to get black athletes fired, smearing them for daring to shine a spotlight on racist violence. Amazingly, a real federal aid package for Puerto Rico has yet to be announced. By some reports, more money has been spent securing the president's visits to Mar-a-Lago. As if all of this weren't enough, the vultures are buzzing. The business press is filled with articles about how the only way for Puerto Rico to get its lights back on is to sell off its electricity utility. Maybe its roads and its bridges too. This is a phenomenon I have called the shock doctrine, the exploitation of wrenching crises to smuggle through policies that devour the public sphere and enrich a tiny elite. We see this dismal cycle again and again. We saw it after the 2008 financial crash. We are seeing it already in how the Tories are planning to exploit Brexit to push through disastrous pro-corporate policies without debate. We're counting on you to stop them, Barry. The reason I am highlighting Puerto Rico is, of course, because the situation is urgent, but also because it's a kind of microcosm for our much larger global crisis, one that contains many of the same overlapping elements: accelerating climate chaos, militarism, histories of colonialism, a weak and neglected public sphere, a totally dysfunctional democracy, and overlaying it all, the seemingly bottomless capacity to discount huge numbers of lives of Black and brown people. Ours is an age when it's become impossible to pry one crisis apart from the other. They have all merged, reinforcing and deepening each other like one shambling, multi-headed beast. I think it's helpful to think of the current US president along the same lines. It's tough to know exactly how to adequately sum him up. So let me try a local example. You know that horrible thing currently clogging up London's sewers? I believe you call it the Fatberg. Well, Trump is the political equivalent of that. He is a merger of all that is noxious in the culture, in the economy, and in the body politic, all kind of glommed together in a self-adhesive mass, and we're finding it very, very hard to dislodge. We have to laugh. What else can we do? But make no mistake, whether it's climate change or the nuclear threat. Trump represents a crisis that, if left unchecked, could echo through geologic time. But here is my message to you today. Moments of crisis do not have to go that shock doctrine route. They do not have to become opportunities for the already obscenely wealthy to grab still more. They can also go the opposite way. They can be moments when we find our best selves, when we locate reserves of strength and focus and resolve that we never knew we had. And we see this every time disaster strikes at the grassroots. We all witnessed it in the aftermath of the Grenfell Tower catastrophe. When the people responsible, once again, were MIA, the community came together, held one another in care, organized the donations, advocated for the living and for the dead. And they are doing it still, more than 100 days after the fire, when there is still no justice and, scandalously, only a handful of survivors have been rehoused. And it's not only at the grassroots level where we see this capacity for disaster to awaken something powerful in us. There is also a long and proud history of crisis sparking progressive transformation on a society-wide scale. Think of the victories won by working people for social housing and old age pensions during the Great Depression, or for the NHS after the horrors of the Second World War. This should remind us that moments of great crisis and peril do not need to knock us backwards. They can also catapult us forwards. Our progressive ancestors achieved that at key moments in history, in your country and in mine. And we can do it again in this moment where everything is on the line. But what we know from these chapters in history is that we never win these transformative victories simply by resisting, simply by saying no to the latest outrage. To win in a moment of true crisis, we also need a bold and forward-looking yes, a plan to rebuild and respond to the underlying causes behind so much pain. And that plan needs to be convincing, it needs to be credible, and most of all, it needs to be captivating. We have to help a weary and wary public to imagine itself into that better world. And that is why I am so deeply honored to be standing with you today, with the Transformed Labor Party in 2017. And with the next Prime Minister of Britain, Jeremy Corbyn. Because in the last election, that's exactly what you did. Theresa May ran a cynical campaign based on exploiting fear and shock to grab more power for herself. First, the fear of a bad Brexit deal, then the fear that followed the horrific terror attacks in Manchester and London. Your party and your leader responded by focusing on root causes: a failed war on terror, economic inequality, weakened democracy. But you did much more than that. You presented voters with a bold and detailed manifesto, one that laid out, one that laid out a plan for millions of people to have tangibly better lives: free tuition, fully funded healthcare, aggressive climate action. After decades of lowered expectations and asphyxiated political imagination, finally voters had something hopeful and exciting to say yes to. And so many. And so many of them did just that, upending the projections of the entire expert class. Your party proved that the era of triangulation and tinkering is over. The public is hungry. It's hungry for deep change. We're crying out for it. The trouble is, in far too many countries, it's only the far right that is offering or pretending to, with that toxic combination of fake economic populism and very real racism. You showed us that there is another way. A way that speaks the language of decency and fairness, that names the true forces responsible, no matter how powerful, and that is unafraid of some of the ideas we were told were gone for good, like wealth redistribution and nationalizing essential public services. Now, thanks to all of your boldness, we know that this is not just a moral strategy, it's a winning strategy. It fires up the base and it activates constituencies that long ago stopped voting altogether. Now, if you can keep doing that between now and the next election, you will be unbeatable. You showed us something else in the last election, too, and it's just as important. You showed that political parties don't need to fear the creativity and independence of social movements. And social movements also have a huge amount to gain from engaging with electoral politics. And that is a very big deal because, let's be honest, political parties tend to be a bit freakish about control. And real grassroots movements, well, we cherish our independence and we're basically impossible to control. But what we are seeing with the remarkable relationship between labor and momentum, and with many other wonderful campaign organizations, is that it is possible to combine the best of both worlds. If we listen and learn from each other, we can create a force that is more nimble and more powerful than anything that either movements or parties can achieve on their own. I want you to know that what you have done here is reverberating around the world. So many of us are watching your ongoing experiment in this new kind of politics with rapt attention, and you are inspiring others. And of course, what happened here is itself part of a global phenomenon. It's a wave led by young people who came into adulthood just as the global financial system was collapsing and just as climate disruption was banging down the door. Many came out of social movements like Occupy Wall Street or Spain's Indignados. They began by saying no to austerity, to bank bailouts, to fracking, to pipelines. But they came to understand, and we still need to do that, but they came to understand that the biggest challenge is overcoming the way neoliberalism has waged war on our collective imagination. On our ability to even imagine a world outside of its bleak confines. And so these movements came together and started to dream together, laying out bold and different visions for the future and credible pathways out of crisis. And most importantly, they began engaging with political parties to try to win power. We saw it in Bernie Sanders' historical campaign in the US primaries. which was powered by millennials who know that the safe, centrist policies on offer them no kind of safe future. And by the way, some of you may not know this, but Bernie Sanders is still the most popular politician in the United States today. We see something similar with Spain's still young Podemos party, which built in the power of mass movements from day one. In all of these cases, electoral campaigns caught fire with stunning speed, and they got close to taking power, closer than any genuinely transformative political program has in either Europe or North America in my lifetime. But still, in each case, not close enough. So in this time between elections, it's worth thinking about how to make absolutely sure that next time, all of our movements go all the way. Now, a big part of the answer, I think, is just keeping it up. Keep building the yes. But take it further. Outside the heat of a campaign, there is more time to deepen the relationships between issues and movements so that our solutions address multiple crises at once. In all of our countries, we can and must do more to connect the dots between economic injustice, racial injustice, and gender injustice. We need to understand and explain how all of these ugly systems that place one group in a position of dominance over another based on skin color, religious faith, gender, and sexual orientation consistently serve the interests of power and money and always have. They do it. They do it by keeping us divided and by keeping themselves protected. And we also, I think, can do more to keep front of mind the fact that we are in a climate emergency, the roots of which are found in the same system of bottomless greed that underlies our economic emergency. But states of emergency, let's recall, can be catalysts for deep progressive victories. So, let's draw out the connections between the gig economy that treats human beings like a raw resource to use up and then discard, and the dig economy, in which the extractive companies treat the earth in precisely the same way. And let's show exactly how we can move from that gig and dig economy to a society based on principles of care, caring for the planet and for one another. A society where the work of our caregivers and of our land and water protectors is respected and valued. A world where no one and nowhere gets thrown away, whether in fire-trap housing estates or on hurricane-ravaged islands. I applaud the clear stance that Labor has taken against fracking and for clean energy. And I think we can up our ambition to show exactly how battling climate change is a once-in-a-century chance to build a fairer and more democratic economy for the many, not the few. Because as we rapidly transition off of fossil fuels, we cannot replicate the wealth concentration and the injustices of the oil and coal economy, in which hundreds of billions in profits have been privatized and the tremendous risks and costs have been socialized. We can and must design a system in which the polluters pay a very large share of the costs of transitioning off of this disastrous model. A model where we keep green energy in public hands and in community hands, That way, revenues stay in your communities to pay for childcare and firefighters and other crucial services. And it's the only way to make sure that green jobs that are created are union jobs and pay a living wage. How's this for a motto? Leave the oil and gas in the ground, but leave no worker behind. And the best part, you don't need to wait until you get to Westminster to start this great transition. You can use the levers that you have already. You can take a page from Barcelona and turn your labor-controlled cities into beacons for the world transformed. A good start. A good start would be divesting your pensions from fossil fuels and investing that money. A good start would be divesting from fossil fuels and investing that money in low-carbon social housing and green energy cooperatives. That way, people can begin to experience the benefits of the next economy even before the next election and know in their bones that, yes, there is and always was an alternative. In closing, I want to stress, and echoing Kate as your international speaker, that none of this can be about turning one nation into some kind of progressive museum. In wealthy countries like yours and mine, we need migration policies and levels of international financing that reflect what we owe to the global South. That reflect our historic role in destabilizing their economies and ecologies for many, many years. For instance, during this epic hurricane season, we've heard a lot of talk about the British Virgin Islands and the French Virgin Islands and so on. Rarely was it seen as relevant to observe that these are not reflections of where Europeans like to holiday. They are reflections of the fact that so much of the vast wealth of empire was extracted from these islands in bonded human flesh. It may be inconvenient to note, but this is the wealth that supercharged Europe's and North America's industrial revolution, positioning us as the super polluters we are today. And that, in turn, is intimately connected to the fact that the future and security of island nations are now at grave risk from superstorms, from sea level rise, and from dying coral reefs. What should this mean to us today? It means welcoming migrants and refugees. And it means paying our fair share to help many more countries ramp up justice-based green transitions of their own. Trump going rogue is no excuse to demand less of ourselves in the UK and Canada or anywhere else for that matter. It means the opposite, that we have to demand more of ourselves, to pick up the slack until the United States manages to get its sewer system unclogged. I firmly believe that all of this work, challenging as it is a crucial part of the path to victory. That the more ambitious, consistent, and holistic you can be in painting a picture of the world transformed, the more credible a Labour government will become. Because you went and showed us that you can win. Now you have to win. We all do. Winning is a moral imperative. The stakes are too high and time is too short to settle for anything less. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi. So, conference, you know that we were unable to complete all of our scheduled business this morning, and we've therefore made some changes to the timetable. Shortly, we'll be hearing from our TUC guest speaker, Mary Bousted, and after that, we'll take all of the votes that we should have taken this morning, including the card votes on rule changes and constitutional amendments. We'll then move to the health and care debate, which will be opened by Jonathan Ashworth, and I will ask for contemporary composites 8 and 9 to be moved, and we will take the emergency motion on assault on emergency service workers. That debate will conclude with a speech by Barbara Keeley at 4 p.m. We will then take the remaining contemporary composites as per the agreed timetable in the CAC Report 3. So, we now welcome our guest speaker to bring greetings from the Trade Union Congress, this year's president of the TUC, Mary Bousted.
Well, conference, follow that. That's a bit hard. It's a bit of a graveyard spot, but I'll try. So I'm very delighted to bring greetings from the TUC, to bring solidarity from the TUC, and from the National Education Union, which I'm very proud to lead with my friend Kevin Courtney. And to return the greetings that Glenys Willmott brought to our Congress just 2 weeks ago. As a trade unionist, Glenys Willmott brought to our Congress and stressed the ties that have bound us together for over a century. And at this crucial moment, with the government in disarray, that's a message that I want to repeat today. Congress never, in our shared history, have our values mattered more than now. Our economy is becoming more dysfunctional. Our jobs are more insecure. Our living standards are falling. And with Brexit, our future is ever more uncertain. And all of this underlies the need for change, economic change, industrial change, and political change. The trade union movement wants to work with the Labour Party to deliver the great jobs that ordinary workers are crying out for. The trade union movement wants to work with the Labour Party to increase wages and boost demand in the economy. And we want to work with you to eradicate abuses like zero-hours contracts and false self-employment. It's time to rebuild our public services too. Let's give our NHS and social care system the resources that they need. Let's free our councils from the strangling grip of austerity and safeguard our future by investing in our schools and young people. The National Education Union was proud to play a leading role in the school funding campaign that made such an impact during the election that Angela talked about this morning. A campaign that brought to life for every parent, for every teacher, for every school leader, the impact of the cuts on their schools in England. A campaign that shifted the votes of over 750,000 voters to Labour 2 weeks before polling day. And conference, it's time to wage war on inequality. How can it be right that here and now, in one of the world's richest countries in 2017, a quarter of our children live in severe poverty, not knowing, many of them, where they're going to eat, and not knowing too often whether their home will be warm or whether their parents will be there to care for them because of shift work and low pay? How can it be right that top bosses earn hundreds of times more than the workers they employ? How can it be right that nurses have to use food banks while city fat cats dodge their taxes on an industrial basis? Conference, it isn't right. So the Labour Party and the trade union movement need to stick together and to fight for change together. In the post-referendum era, with the right, as Naomi said, seeking to pit worker against worker, there's never been more need for solidarity amongst working people. Black and white, young and old, gay and straight, women and men, our fortunes will rise or fall as one. As the late, great Joe Cox so poignantly said, there will always be more that unites us than divides us. Comrades, I expect us to be united, and I implore you, I urge you to heed Jeremy Corbyn's call. If you're not in a trade union, if anybody in this hall isn't in a trade union, then join one. Join a trade union and work to experience and to realise the saying, unity is strength. Collectivism, we achieve far more as a collective than we ever do as individuals. And if we want to fight back against breaking the minimum wage, against zero-hours contracts, against exploitation at work, if we really want to fight those things, then fight them through the union movement. Because working together as one labour movement with the trade union movement, we can achieve more than we achieve separately. Who created the NHS? We did. Who built the modern welfare state? We did. Who built homes fit for heroes? We did. And think about all the other things. Universities, which were accessible to all. Equal rights, better pensions, the minimum wage, safer workplaces. We delivered them all by working together. And we cannot stand back and let this government roll back the progress won by generations of working people. So it is time for us to fight back and to speak up for millions of ordinary workers who daily work all the hours God sends and yet fail to make enough money to support their families and give them any decency or security or hope in their lives. We have to fight back against deplorable Victorian working conditions which are rife now in the 21st century. Conference, I'm convinced we can do it by organising, by campaigning, by remaining true to our values. Now, my values are rooted in my upbringing. I'm one of 8 children. My parents, good Catholics, taught me it's a mortal sin to vote Tory. And I've never disobeyed my parents. And I've certainly never voted Tory, a trade union member and a Labour Party member from their earliest days. But when I began teaching in the 1980s, the Tories were in government. School buildings were crumbling, class sizes rising, teachers' pay falling. Does it sound familiar? The bosses call the shots, and working people face the consequences. So we face similar challenges now, but we must never forget, and Naomi reminded us, that things can and will change, and we will make that change. What we've learned, and what I've learned over the past 30 years, is that we can succeed even in tough times, and my view is we're in tough times, and over the next 2 years, they're going to get tougher. We saw during the general election in June that ordinary people are fed up with the status quo. We saw ordinary people with their hope restored and able to face the future with some confidence because Labour, against all the odds, did so well. So at this defining moment for our country and for our movement, let's remember who we are and what we can achieve. Let's stand up for what we believe in. Let's win the fairness, justice and equality that working people crave. And all of you, every one of you, join a trade union. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We will now take the votes on this morning's debate. First, the emergency motion on Bombardier moved by Unite. Can I see all those in favour of the motion? Good. And all those against? Well, that's carries. Very good. Good start. So we will now take the vote on the Early Years Education and Skills Report as a whole. Oh no, sorry, yes. Excuse me. Conference, during this debate there was a reference back moved by the delegate from Colne Valley, and it was moved that the paragraph headed schools on page 10 of the National Policy Forum report be referred back to the Policy Commission and the MPF, and the delegate in her speech explained the reason for doing so. So can I see all those in favour of the reference back? Okay. And all those against? No, that's clear. All right, that looks like that's carried.
So we'll vote on the whole.
So now we'll vote on the whole document, taking into account the reference back. Can I see all those in favour in accepting the report? Okay, and all those against? Okay, and that is carried. Very good. Okay, so we must move to the votes on the rule changes, and these will be taken by card vote. During the debate this morning, 9 of the CLP and affiliate rule changes were remitted, therefore they will not be voted upon. The 4 card votes remaining are therefore for 1 to 3 on the rule changes proposed by the NEC, and card vote 8 on the rule change proposed by Brighton Pavilion CLP, and the NEC recommendation is to oppose it. These are the only card votes that are remaining, and you should not cast any other votes than these ones. So, the summary of the votes and the NEC recommendations is in the CAC report and on the screen. Oh, it is. It's on the screen behind me. And you should cast all of your votes at the same time. Tellers in your places, and could all the doors in the halls be closed? Please remain in your seats while the votes are taken. A few people have asked what's going on, which is fair enough. There are lots of new delegates at this conference. So we're taking the card votes on the rule changes. So on the screens, that shows the rule changes that you guys will be voting on, you people will be voting on.
So it's card votes
So
1 to 3.
card votes 1 to 3 on the NEC rule changes, and card vote 8 proposed by Brighton Pavilion, which we recommend to oppose. could everyone please sit down while we're taking the votes, because there's still areas we've got to collect votes from. So if you don't mind just sitting down while we collect the remaining votes. Thank you. Hi, can everyone please sit down so we can see who hasn't voted yet, so we can make sure we collect all of the votes. Thank you. Okay, could we return to order so we can take the last few votes and then we can move on? We want to take as many speakers as possible in the health and care debate and the debates on the contemporary motions. We've fallen a little bit behind, but we do want to take as many votes as possible, as many speakers as possible. Yeah. Anyone who hasn't voted yet, could you please put your hands up? Okay, so there's someone down here, someone over here. Yeah, everyone who hasn't voted yet, could you please hold your ballots in the air and someone will come and collect them from you shortly. Okay. So while we collect the 1 or 2 remaining votes, can everyone please take their seats? Has everyone voted? Thank you all very much. Oh no, there's still one. Have you voted over there in the white? No, it's okay. Okay. So can we come to order? That's great. Thank you. Conference, we will now begin the debate on health and care. In this debate, we're considering the National Policy Forum report section on health and care on pages 33 to 42. We will also be taking the contemporary composites in the NHS and social care and the emergency motion on assaults on emergency service workers. Our first speaker is Shadow Secretary for Health, Jonathan Ashworth. Oh, go on, Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Gary Heather from Islington North. I don't want to take up much of the time, but I know that the policy reports, and I know the reference back procedure is new. In CAC1 on Sunday, it was accepted that it was a new procedure and it would take time to settle down. What we've had is, though, we've had inconsistencies from chairs of sessions about how it's being applied. So one chair said that you had to get called into the debate in order to move reference back on a policy document. And then today, there was another approach, which was that you can go and call for a reference back on a section. Now, that's not really fair, and it's not clear what we're doing. It's been accepted that this is a new procedure. And what I've always said is I think that this should be actually in the CAC document every day about what the procedure is, and that it is applied consistently and fairly, because otherwise delegates that are patiently waiting to speak will feel that they are being disadvantaged by people that have got parrots and dinosaurs and all the rest of it. And there was actually a speaker up here that actually appealed to conference that parrots and dinosaurs, we stop using those. And I actually agree with that. I know it looks fun, but it's quite galling when you're actually trying to adhere to a procedure and it's not being adhered to. It looks as if favouritism is being applied. And of course, that is not democracy. What we need is, we need clear instructions. And by the way, just in finishing, there is going to be a rule change next year from our CLP about having standing orders for the conference. That will mean it will be absolutely clear the way the procedure of the conference run, and I can't wait till we get to that position. But until then, I think the CAC should make it clear about what procedure is being applied in terms of policy reports and reference backs. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, Gary. So thank you very much to the delegate from Islington North and also chair of my Labour group. This is something that the CAC is aware of and considering, and it's a new process that we haven't run before. What I was thinking of trying to do in the health and social care debate is actually in one section where we call for speakers asking to call people who want to reference back the policy document to see if that works, to give people an opportunity to reference back if they want to. To get on with conference and move things along so we can hear from as many people as possible, here is our guest speaker, the fantastic Jonathan Ashworth MP.
Thank you, Chair. And it is a tremendous privilege to speak from the platform, humbled in the knowledge that it was this conference 80 years ago that demanded public universal health care. And it was this party, almost 70 years ago, that established a national health service free at the point of use, covering every man, woman and child in the land. And today, we renew our commitment to that cause, and we dedicate ourselves to electing a Jeremy Corbyn Labour government whose mission will be the rebuilding of a comprehensive, universal, reintegrated public national health service, free at the point of use, there for all when you need it. And our task also today is to speak out with a sense of urgency about what is happening to our NHS. Waiting lists topped 4 million this year. 2.5 million people waited over 4 hours in A&E. This winter, patients on trolleys in corridors, ambulances backed up outside overcrowded hospitals. The nation left shocked by a little boy with suspected meningitis waiting 5 hours in an A&E without a bed, forced to lie on 2 plastic chairs. Some called it a humanitarian crisis. Well, conference, when you underfund the NHS, when you cut billions from social care, let's call it what it really is, a Tory-manufactured crisis. And this crisis, where waiting lists are now so lengthy that more and more patients feel they have no option but to pay for a surgeon to come to their bedside, while the rest who can't afford it wait longer and longer. Friends, a person's health should never depend on their individual wealth. So a Labour government would allocate an extra £45 billion to our NHS and social care sector. And to avoid another winter like the one we've just had, we would establish a £500 million emergency winter fund so that patients and their families never have to suffer like that again at winter. This is the leadership that Jeremy Hunt should be showing. But he's not, is he? In fact, you may have seen it in the newspapers today. Last week, Jeremy Hunt ordered hospital bosses to a summit where they were instructed to chant, "We can do this." It's absolutely true. You can't make things like this up. Well, you know something? The NHS doesn't need silly Jeremy Hunt gimmicks. The NHS needs a Jeremy Corbyn Labour government. Now, I will be a health secretary who will work closely with all our NHS staff. So let us send a message today to the staff of the NHS, who work day in, day out, at weekends too, whose hands deliver us into the world, who comfort us in our final moments. You have our gratitude, you have our backing, you have our commitment that we will tackle chronic vacancies, we will bring back the bursaries, and we will scrap the pay cap and deliver fair pay for all of you. And to those of you who come to our shores from the EU and beyond, we say you are welcome, your rights will be secured, you are not bargaining chips, but you are part of our society and part of the fabric of the National Health Service as well. But we all know the fabric of that NHS is being constantly undermined by the millions of pounds wasted on the constant, endless tendering of services to private providers. And we know it's patient care that suffers. Let me give you one very quick example. An ambulance contract here in Sussex, handed to a private company who didn't even own any ambulances. So they subcontracted to 20 other companies. 2 of those companies ceased trading, and ambulance drivers couldn't be paid. Now, thankfully, that contract has been taken off private hands and back into the NHS. And recently, I had the privilege of meeting some of those ambulance drivers from the GMB, ambulance drivers who took their patients to appointments for weeks without pay. Doesn't that... Don't those ambulance drivers show that public service is about a greater calling, is about compassion, care and public duty, not contracts, markets and commercialisation? So I can pledge to you today, a Labour government will legislate to reinstate the Secretary of State's responsibilities for universal care, will reintegrate the NHS, reverse the Health and Social Care Act, fight the fire sale of assets and end Tory privatisation. But you know something else? You'll have seen it in your local communities. Cutting beds, closing services, rationing of treatments because of Tory underfunding is not sustainable transformation. So, conference, we will stop the SDPs and integrate health and social care as well. Now, I also want a new approach to public health that protects people's well-being for years to come. To prevent disease, to reduce the toll from cancer, stroke, heart disease, diabetes, it's time to start tackling the causes of ill health as well. We need to end the dismantling of our public health services. We need to tackle social isolation. We need to build decent homes and improve the quality of the air we breathe. We have seen an increase in hospital admissions for malnutrition in this country. We have seen a stalling in the improvement in life expectancy for the first time in 100 years. Now, we know a child born into poverty is likely to suffer far worse health outcomes in life. It was once said, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. Now, this party has long been committed to abolishing child poverty. So I can tell you today that the next Labour government will commit to an all-out assault on child ill health too. No longer will we let squalor impair the health of our children, conference. So that means we'll recruit more health visitors and school nurses for our communities. We'll invest in dentistry, and to tackle child obesity, we'll give every infant a free school meal and ban junk food advertising on family nighttime television too. And we'll end the disgraceful cuts to child and adolescent mental health services. We'll end the scandal of children being treated in adult wards and finally deliver true parity of esteem, conference. I want to tell you about one other thing. This year, £43 million will be slashed from alcohol and drug addiction treatment services. Recently, I chose to speak out very personally about my own circumstances. Growing up with a dad who had a drink problem, he was an alcoholic. His drinking hung over all my childhood. I remember going home, the fridge was filled with nothing but bottles of drink. Spending evenings with him where all he did was drink until he fell asleep. Things got so bad in his later years that he felt he couldn't even come to my wedding because he was too embarrassed. I tell you this story not for your indulgence or sympathy, but because there are 2 million children growing up with an alcoholic parent. 335,000 children grow up with a parent with drug abuse issues. So part of our assault on child ill health, I will put in place, with your support, hopefully, the first ever national strategy to support children of alcoholics and drug users, and will invest in addiction treatment and prevention as well. So, conference. Thank you. So, conference. A fully funded public national health service. Fair pay for our staff. An end to Tory privatisation. An assault on health inequalities. The very best quality of care for all, free at the point of use, there when you need it. This is what we strive for. We settle for nothing less. It is the demand of a civilised society. So today, we pledge ourselves to united effort and resolve that the next Labour government will rebuild our NHS. Thank you very much.
Jonathan. So we will now take contemporary Composite 8 on the NHS to be moved by the Socialist Health Association. And could Islington South and Finsbury CLP please be ready to second? Oh, and could we also get delegates for Composite 9 on social care from Paul and Weaver Vale CLP to also be ready? And can we please ask that everyone keeps to time so we can get as many speakers as possible?
Ready for me,
Yeah,
Chair?
please do.
Conference. Alex Scott Samuel, Chair of the Socialist Health Association. Thank you. Vice Chair of Liverpool Wavertree CLP and proud member of Doctors in Unite. As a 50-year NHS campaigner, I'm thrilled to follow that wonderful speech from John Ashworth and 3 great speeches. And Naomi Klein said that we need to renationalise essential services and that will make us unbeatable. Well, I came here already prepared to say that if you unanimously support this motion, I think that that is the motion that will win us the next general election. People have been waiting and waiting for Labour to clearly, explicitly commit itself to complete renationalisation and reinstatement of the NHS, and it was wonderful to hear John doing that. The reasons that we need to do this are, I'm sure, apparent to all of you. They're all around us. The toxic Tory triad of rationing, cuts and privatisation. And it's not quite as chaotic as it seems. Those of us who research these things know that it was an intentional market failure that followed the Health and Social Care Act in 2012. The Health and Social Care Act, 350 pages long, because it was written by McKinsey's corporate lawyers in order to ensure that every line and T and I was there in order that they could privatise the NHS. And that's what they've gradually been doing. The commercial market they created failed, as we knew it would. There were avoidable deaths, for example, in the Carillion Surgical Centre in Stevenage, the terrible death of a baby in Hackney when the out-of-hours service was awarded to a company called Harmony, who replaced the committed GPs who wanted to provide that service, and a de-skilled, underfunded service let down the people of Hackney. There are many other examples, as I'm sure you know, of that intentional market failure that the Tories imposed on us. And now there is rationing all around us. I'm sure there are people in this room who have hip or knee arthritis and have been waiting far too long in pain for their joint replacements, or who have cataracts and now you have to be practically blind before you can get cataract surgery. Once again, the bar is being raised not because of effective public health, as the Tories claim, but in order to push people who can afford it towards insurance and the private sector, as John said. And that is the worst thing of all, the privatisation. Going back to NERMI and no logo, NHS, of course, is now just a brand logo. And when you go into your GP or your hospital and it says NHS over the door, well, behind that door, you could have the agents of Richard Branson or of United Health or of all the other asset strippers who are hemorrhaging our taxpayers' money that we contribute to the NHS. Because in the public health service that John and Jeremy and colleagues are going to create, any so-called surpluses are, of course, reinvested and not given to profiteers and shareholders. Those of you who work in the NHS will know how demoralised our doctors and nurses and other health staff are, both by the pay restraint, which I'm delighted to hear John say we will scrap, by the removal of nurse and other student bursaries so that working class people now have less access to the health professions. It's absolutely disgraceful. But how did we get there? As I say, it's no coincidence. I'm proud that SHA published the research by Stuart Player, which showed that the precise origins of the 5-year forward view within which the STPs are the current vehicle, the precise origins of the new models of care and the accountable care systems that are now being imposed on us are at the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2012, when a group led by Simon Stevens, now director of NHS England, but then vice president of United Health, the predatory US transnational healthcare corporation, developed clear proposals for undermining public health services around the world and replacing them using these new models of care, which impose community-based de-skilled units, replacing NHS services and NHS specialist staff, and using fixed packages of care within restricted budgets. I think John said just about everything else I wanted to say, so I urge you to stay till the very end of this session when the vote takes place, and to turn John and Jeremy in particular from a national treasure into a national hero by saying, we will reinstate the NHS. In the first weeks of a Labour government, we will bring in an NHS reinstatement bill to do everything in our motion and everything John has said. Thank you, conference.
Thank you very much.
Chair, Alice, conference. My name's Sue Richards. I'm from Islington South and Finsbury, and I'm also a member of Keep Our NHS Public. And it's my job to second the motion that 41 constituencies have agreed through the representatives last night should be put forward. And I want to be quite tough on John Ashworth, which actually is hard because it was such a good speech. And I liked it a lot, and I really, really listened carefully to what he said and didn't say. So I'm going to touch on that during the speech. I want to say that the last Labour government did some fantastically good things for the NHS, as well as some fairly awful things. Top of the list of the fantastically good was obviously the funding, which took us from, round about the level we are now, up to the European average by 2009, 11.1% of GDP. to be spent on the NHS, and that's what led to all those good results on waiting times and waiting lists, cancer recovery times going up because people were being seen earlier, all those good things that happened because we put the investment in to make them happen. And I was thinking about what's the gap between where we are now and where we were then. And actually, the figure of 45 billion comes to mind, because that is the gap between what we spend now and what we spent then, 11.1% of GDP. It's a £45 billion extra. So I hope very much that John was telling us about the annual figure that's going to go into the NHS budget, rather than the overall figure in a 5-year parliament, because we need a hell of a lot more than that. I will take it up with John McDonnell, give the chance. Yeah. Anyway, so if that was top of the list of what was good about the Labour government, also top of the list about what was negative was the adoption of Thatcher's model for the NHS. Frank Dobson kicked out the purchaser-provider split, but when Alan Milburn took over as Secretary of State, he brought it back in and added privatisation elements to it, so that when the Lansley bombshell dropped and the parliamentary debates were taking place over what became the 2012 Act, when the Lib Dems and the Tories said, oh, we're only continuing the route that Labour was on anyway, actually it was difficult to argue against because they were right. So it goes without saying, really, that we all agree that the elements in the Lansley Act needs to be overturned, and we need to do that. But I want to put to you the key element in this contemporary motion, which is that we need. Just one. You are in my ward. You're my ward chancellor, Alice. Give me a minute. I'm your ward chair, so I can't really stop. The key element, I think, is that we don't just need to reinstate the Secretary of State's role. We need to move back from Thatcher's model of the NHS to a Narin Bevan's model of the NHS, which is a properly planned, coherent, publicly accountable system for the NHS, which removes the internal market as well as the external market. And I have to say, I don't think I heard John say that. Last year conference, you passed a motion for the reinstatement bill, which was to include that element. And we've had to put another motion this year. It would break my heart to come back again. So, John Ashworth, don't be breaking my heart.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, thank you very much. We'll now take Contemporary Composite 9 on social care. And people who are my ward chair get extra time, but other people, please, can we keep it to time? Because we want to get as many floor speakers in as possible. Sue gets special treatment.
Hello, conference. Hello, conference. I'd just like to say I'm from Poole. First time, believe it or not, at a Labour Party conference. First time speaker here. And before I start, I would just like to say that Poole is a Tory stronghold. I don't know whether you've heard of Robert Sims, our MP. We call him the Invisible Man. He was Theresa May's chief whip, and boy, she whipped him to do anything she wanted to do. I won't take that any further, but I will leave you with that image. Anyway, when the election was called, we organised and we mobilised, and we had a rebirth of Labour, which is what we did call the Corbyn effect. And within 6 weeks, we turned a 22,000 majority. We cut it in half. Katie Taylor, our parliamentary candidate, got over 14,000 votes. I'm sorry to go on about this, but what a joy to see the Tories in their grey skeletal selves start to shake and shiver when they saw that Poole Labour was alive, kicking, and with Dorset Labour and with the South West, we are rising. And we will play our part to turn the South West red and kick the brutalist Tories out of Westminster. Okay. Right, so Let's go. I'll assume some of these, I'm not used to speaking very seriously on stuff, but here we go. This has been a collaborative piece from our members. Virtually everyone accepts that moving the motion on social care. Virtually everyone accepts in the current social care system it's in crisis. It's complex. It suffers an unfair means-tested and postcode lottery of charges, and there is often little support for family carers. In addition, there are concerns surrounding the standard and quality of care, such as the flying 15-minute visits, training, employment conditions of care workers, the lack of a robust and effective regulation and monitoring system for the providers. The system is therefore in urgent need of radical and far-reaching reform. At the heart of the problem, and this is a bit of a trick and a bit of a con by the policymakers, is that we face a false separation of medical care funded by the NHS through taxation and through at the point of access for all, and social care that's provided by private companies and means tested. And over the last 30 years, there's been a systematic attempt to redefine illnesses affecting old age as social rather than medical. That's pretty tricky, that's pretty clever, isn't it? Resulting in thousands of frail elderly people with complex health problems being removed from the free NHS systems and medical care and moved into the community, either in their own homes or in a residential home to receive social care. This has led to a perverse situation where those suffering from, say, something like Alzheimer's disease are classed as needing social care rather than medical treatment and routinely left to fund themselves under a means-tested system. And I'll diversify here. While we were campaigning in Turling Moor, which is what was called a rough area. It's not, it's a beautiful area. It reminds me of where I was born in Salford in Manchester. We came across an old man, and he was stinking of urine, and he defecated himself, and he was tending to the roses in his garden. And we talked to him, and no one had been to visit him. He was alone, and it was obvious that he had Alzheimer's. And there's thousands of old people like that, abandoned by this government. Do you think that's right, or do you think that's wrong? Okay, we'll move on. So that's why it's time, conference, and for Labour to adopt a bolder approach to this issue and support the idea of a tax-funded national care service. Yes? Since 2011, government cuts have resulted in more than £5 billion reduction in social care budgets in England, which has inevitably led to increasing numbers of older people being denied access to care and support. The latest figures from the Health and Care Social Information Centre show that there are over, this absolutely enrages me, and I shall try to stay calm. There are over 1.8 million new requests for help in 2014. Now imagine that. 2014-15. Out of those, 520,000 got no support at all. 575,000 were redirected to charities or phone helplines. The shocking reality is that only 144,000 people actually receive publicly funded long-term help. Out of 1.8 million requests, don't you feel that that's not right? Okay, I might need to go over a little bit, so...
could you please wrap up?
I'll try and cut a little bit. Let's go into the funding of it.
Could you just move to the end?
Yes, I will. But I might take a bit because the other woman did. Not that I'm a woman. I am a man, I'm all man.
You're not chair of my awards.
Okay, I will do. So, just one more thing. It's about the costing of it, and I'll be very quick. According to the Centre for Research for Social and Cultural Change, many large care home chains are rife with dubious financial engineering and tax avoidance and complex business models. Okay, so when Four Seasons, a private representative, went bust, they were purchased by a private firm that's got all its money and 185 companies registered in offshore accounts. I'll stop there, but we say support the motion. We are looking for a national care service funded at the point of access. The motion doesn't go all the way there, but that's the long-term view we hope for the elderly of our country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the delegate from Weaverville isn't here in the room. So can I ask? Oh, you are? Oh, fantastic. Come on up. That's good.
Good afternoon, conference. I'm a first-time delegate and speaker from Weaver Vale CLP. Thank you. I'm a proud member of Unite the Union. And as the Weaver Vale delegate, I second the composite regarding social care. Before I speak to the motion, I just want to say how great it is to have a Labour MP, Mike Amesbury, in Weaver Vale. We kicked the Tory out and now have a 4,000 majority, and what a brilliant job he's doing already. I'm sure you're aware that there is a growing public concern over the continuing crisis in social care, particularly following recent reports of the looming winter crisis within the health service. A significant factor in the social care crisis includes the brutal cuts to local authority budgets by this Tory government. I welcome Unison's Care Workers for Change campaign initiative, as home care workers provide an essential and vital role caring for the most frail and vulnerable in our communities. We know that most care workers are on the minimum wage or on zero-hour contracts. The union's campaign also highlights the emotional and physical impact on carers, who often feel undervalued and overstretched, as many carers are not provided the time or the resource to provide the care. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, not all are union members. But can you imagine how carers feel that they can't provide the service that they want to provide because of Tory cuts to budgets? The manifesto at the snap election was brilliant, but we need to stress the absolute importance of an integrated health and social care service for the benefit of all. Before I leave this stage, I want to send a message to Prime Minister May and her government. If you can find the money to cling to power with the DUP, you can find the money to fund health and social care appropriately. I ask you to support this composite on social care. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And can we now take the emergency motion on assaults on emergency service workers, moved by the GMB and seconded by Unison?
Andy Irving, GMB Trade Union. Chair, Conference. This year we've seen the very best of our emergency services, and we have been completely humbled by their bravery. At London Bridge we saw paramedics rushing to the scene to save lives. At Westminster, a police officer, Keith Palmer, gave his own life to protect the heart of our democracy. And who can forget the pictures of firefighters at Grenfell? Exhausted men and women going back into that building again and again and again, putting their lives on the line. Those who have served in emergency services know that they don't act without fear, they act in spite of fear. And that's why we call them heroes. As Sadiq Khan said yesterday, we are right to praise these people. But Conference, they're also workers, and they are members of a trade union, and we couldn't be prouder of them. They are the first responders, and every single day our members find themselves in situations most of us would run a mile from. I want to share a story of one of our members in Bradford, Sarah Kelly. Sarah is an ambulance technician, and she was sexually assaulted last year in her ambulance. She was recently told that her attacker is now getting out of prison, and she is terrified. I can't imagine how she feels. But conference, even after numerous meetings with her employers, she has had no assurances that she won't be sent back to see that man again if he calls. For them, it's not a priority. They are not willing to learn from their mistakes or have a joined-up approach. GMB is doing everything we can to help Sarah, but the problem is Sarah's employers have no duty to protect her and stop her being called there again. We need change now. Conference. Assaults against our emergency services are at record highs. 1,000 firefighters, 2,400 paramedics and over 2.4 million assaults on police officers last year. This is a national disgrace. Our movement has led the way on making sure that when you are at work you are kept safe and feel secure. But increasingly our emergency services are finding themselves in vulnerable situations, and all too often security at work is far from a reality. We can do something about it today. Labour MPs and trade unions are fighting for a change in the law so that any assault on emergency services is an aggravated offence. And in the manifesto, we proudly backed a call for NH workers to be protected in the same way. Conference, we can send a message that even though the Tories undermine, undervalue our public servants, Labour will do everything in our power to protect and support them. Protect the protectors, I move.
Good afternoon, Conference Chair. Jane Gebby, Unison, seconding the assaults on the emergency services workers. Unison fully support this motion as we have thousands of public sector heroes who respond to incidents in times of crisis. We hear from the Tories about these heroes, the ones that they don't want to pay a fair living wage. Those who run into extremely dangerous situations, not to surpass all others at whatever cost, but to help others at whatever cost to themselves. They respond to the unknown with no control of the situation they face. The motion calls for employers to protect and support staff to carry out their duties free from all forms of violence. And we would also ask that all our Labour MPs be in the House to support Chris Bryant's Protect the Protectors private members bill being heard within the month. The legislation as it is outdated and it's not supportive of our heroes. People in dire situations are always going to need help and support, but the reality is the very same situations are instrumental in creating conditions where our members are more likely to be attacked. Staff in frontline services are more... Oh, I do apologise, I've got this all messed up. Oh, dear me. The CPS is refusing to prosecute cases because of outdated legislation. We need a cultural change, Conference. The rising statistics of those being injured in the line of work is simply not acceptable, and we need to protect their best interests. Conference, always remember that it's the voice in the darkness that gives hope to those who really need it. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. How much time do we have for speakers? 20 minutes. So now we have around 20 minutes to take speakers from the floor. So there is a lady over there in a floral dress with a red thing. Is that a floral dress? Unite. A lady at the front, delegate, excuse me, delegate in the purple t-shirt. And with the red tie over there in that section waving the blue thing, and then, yeah, so you had the delegate there. So those are the three for the moment. We're going to come back and do another round later. And again, if we ask everyone please to keep to time so we can use this time for as many speakers as possible. I think there's some confusion because many people are wearing floral dresses. I know. Can we get people up to speed quickly so we can take more speakers? Thank you.
Okay. Chair Conference, Dot Burnett. I'm from Blaydon CLP, and I'm up here to congratulate our amazing councillors in Gateshead Council who had to fight through all these budget cuts. I would also like to say that I've been a party member for 50 years, John, probably a long time before you. This is probably the best conference I've ever been to, and I've been to a few. I'd also like to say that we've just elected an amazing MP, Liz Smith, who replaced another amazing MP, Dave Anderson. And she increased the majority of the amount of people who voted. We had people in our area pushing the votes into the ballot boxes with ladles because they couldn't get them in. That's how good it was in our area. Right. I've been an official of my union, the CWU, for 30 years. I'm still a retired member official, and I did serve on the national executive, and I was the president, a very proud president of my union. And it's great to see the fight that Dave is putting forward for the postal workers. So as you can imagine, I've been in a few fights in my time over the years. But I'll tell you, Conference, I've never felt so hopeless when listening to our great councillors from Gateshead standing up in our CLP with despair because of the budget cuts that they've had to make over the past year and the amount of money that's been taken out of our council by this scurrilous government. They're reporting on the fact that they've got to take away money from the most vulnerable in our society, and these despicable policies that this government have got are affecting all of those people that have to rely on social services and health care. It's absolutely disgraceful. I'm not going to take a lot of your time up, Conference, because I know we're stuck for time, really. But I was really glad to hear you say, Jonathan, that you are going to take away the disgraceful 2012 so-called Health and Social Care Act, because it does nothing for the people who are vulnerable in our society. It's an absolute joke. And we have to deal in our constituency, and the people who work for Liz are there every day trying to help people who are being placed in these positions of vulnerability. So, Conference, please support motion 9 and make sure that when we do, that we're looking for an integrated social and health provision back in the hands of the local authorities.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to take the next lot of speakers, then I'm going to call more speakers. So if you guys just wait, if everyone waits until the next two are finished.
Conference, and I promise this is not a North East stitch-up. I'm Nick Forbes, the leader of Labour-run Newcastle City Council, but also the leader of Labour local government. And I'm here to talk to you about the grave financial crisis that our social care system is facing at the moment. Labour councillors have been warning of the impact of austerity since the Lib Dems and the Tories introduced it back in 2010. And we must not let the Lib Dems get away with pretending that they were nothing to do with austerity. They were absolutely at the heart of introducing it. Labour councils have prioritised over the last few years adult social care and children's social care, often in the face of really difficult local opposition. But by protecting the most vulnerable in our communities, we think that is putting Labour values into action. Because we know that social care keeps people independent for longer it keeps them out of hospital, and it means that they can maintain their personal dignity. And the Tory government has come up with desperate sticking plaster after desperate sticking plaster by way of solution. We had the one-off adult social care grant. We've had the Better Care Fund, the Improved Better Care Fund, and worst of all, the adult social care precept, putting the burden onto council taxpayers to pick up the growing gap in the finances for our social care system. A crisis made in Downing Street, but paid for by people in your street through extra council tax bills. They have no plan B. They have no idea what to do. We're hurtling towards a cliff edge in 2020 when funding will drop off and councils will find themselves in really difficult situations. But Labour local government is the engine of new ideas here. Whether it's working on an ethical care charter with our trade union colleagues, whether it's deferred payment schemes so that people can remain in their own homes rather than having to sell them to pay for care, whether it's homelessness prevention. I'm immensely proud to lead an authority, a Labour authority, which has prevented 4,000 cases of homelessness in the last year alone. And whether it's reshaping our children's social care to make sure that our social workers use the best of their expertise and the best of their professional knowledge. But there's no doubt, colleagues and conference, that we still face a huge challenge. It's surely a mark of a civilised society that we keep people dignified and secure in later life. It's surely a mark of a civilised society that we protect and support children from sexual and violent abuse. And it's surely a mark of a civilised society that we support people with disabilities and learning disabilities to live rich, rewarding lives. And to do that, we need more money into our care system. We need a Labour government to deliver not just the £1.5 billion in the manifesto, but on the £6 billion shortfall that we know that Labour councils and councils around the country are facing. We need a Labour government to back our Labour councils for dignity and for fairness for all. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, Nick. Okay. So while this speaker's coming up, I'm going to pick another 3 more speakers quickly. There was a lady waving a yellow jacket. Oh, sorry, a person waving a yellow jacket. There was the person with the blonde hair and glasses, also in the flowery dress, who I did try and call last. And then someone wants to make a reference back. Can everyone? Yeah, go on. In the green, who wants to do a reference back over there. And those are my 3 for now. No, it was the person in the green. Cool, go for it.
Conference, Linda Hobson, speaking on behalf of Unison, a registered nurse, proud NHS worker, and somebody else from the North East, so isn't that great? Conference, it's not just Labour politicians telling the government that health and social care is in crisis. It's those of us who are working in the service too. Those of us who are trying to think about what this next winter is going to mean for us and for those who are dependent on the care that we deliver to maintain their well-being and their dignity. And the government can try to hide them and massage the figures, but they can't, and we certainly aren't going to let them. A deficit of £3.5 billion demonstrates how badly the NHS has been affected by this government's austerity measures. But Conference, behind these figures are very real and very human consequences. As a trade union rep, yes, I've had to refer nurses to food banks, but not just nurses. All levels of staff are feeling it. And a colleague of mine, Helen, a domestic, struggling on low pay after year upon year of Tory pay restraint, says to me, she says, Linda, there's just far too much months at the end of my wages. And this is compounded by the mounting pressure placed upon staff by a system failing those who look after us at our time of most need. The Tory vision for our NHS and social care is one starved of cash, fragmented, privatised, with multinationals picking off the best bits, demoralised staff, increase of 0 hours and low hours contracts, carers refused even minimum wage, and the scourge of 15-minute care visits, an absolute disgrace. But we have had significant victories, from the collapse of the privatisation plans for cancer and end-of-life care in Staffordshire to stopping the selling off of NHS professionals. And more councils, like Nick's just said, signing up to the Unison's Ethical Care Charter, ending those 15-minute visits and delivering a real living wage for staff. putting an end to the PFI contract in a hospital in my own region, and working with another NHS trust, Northumberland Tyne and Wear, to become a real living wage employer. In conference, I'd like to mention the scrapping of the NHS bursary because it's really personal to me. A deliberate attack by the Tories on people like me, who sound like me, who without an NHS bursary, I would not be standing on this platform today. The NHS unites people. It has socialist values at its core, which is why it's hated by the Tories. We need an NHS and social care system that puts cooperation ahead of competition, patients ahead of profits, and pays a decent wage to all workers. They deserve better. We deserve better. Please pay up now. Thank you.
Conference. Hello, my name's Charlotte Patterson. I'm from Bristol West and from Protect Our NHS, and I'd like to refer back a section of the Health and Social Care Policy Report because it's complete gobbledygook about privatisation. So it's on page 40 and it's in the second paragraph, but I'll read it to you, so don't worry. So it starts off fine. We start saying the manifesto has made the position of the Labour Party on NHS privatisation clear. Privatisation under a Labour government would be reversed. Yes, that's what we want, isn't it? We want the greedy swine to keep their snouts out of NHS resources. Good, so far so good. But then a few lines down it says, and to ensure that a few lines down it says, making the NHS the preferred provider. We don't want it to be the preferred provider, we want it to be the only provider.
Can you, for the benefit of the...
And then a few more lines down, it finishes, to ensure that excess private profits are not made out of the NHS at the expense of patient care. Excess private profits? We don't want any private profits. So I ask you to support this referral back, for this to be tidied up and made completely clear that we want privatisation to be completely abolished and no other bits put in there. And I'm afraid that means you've got to stay right to the end and remember to vote for the reference back. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just... sorry, do you mind just coming... Delegate, sorry, do you mind just coming back quickly for clarity? Could you indicated you want to reference back a part of the Health and Care Policy Commission. Can you just confirm the precise clause you want to reference back so we can move it? Oh, she's gone. Oh, just the precise... Actually, if you just come up here and tell Greg, and we'll just make sure that we move it correctly, or if you can tell our colleagues over there in the... tell Sam by the red thing. We are the many, not the few. Okay, sorry, excellent. Delegate, please, go ahead.
Conference. Joyce Still, speaking on behalf of Unite the Union. Thank you. Conference. I work as a health visitor. Health visitors have a key role, along with school nurses, in promoting and supporting of health throughout a child and family's life. This vital role is under threat, and my union, Unite, has initiated I Love Your Health Visitor campaign to highlight the importance of this important service. Health visitors see all new mothers following the birth of their baby, but now, with our increasing workload, they are not able to offer the support to the mother that they were able to do in the past. And now this often falls to volunteers to take on the task. School nurses are also often unable to offer support to young people due to their increasing workloads. The provision of health visiting and school nursing is now the responsibility of the local authority. This has been the case since 2015. Funding cuts have meant deep cuts in our public health services, and continuing to provide services
in the face of such cuts is rightly recognised as a key priority by the Health and Care Commission of the NPF. As well as cuts, local authorities have in many cases tendered this out to private companies, for example, Virgin Healthcare, Serco and Solutions for Health. Solutions for Health are going to be running the health visiting service in Slough as of the 1st of October. Worryingly, these companies have little understanding of public health and the implications for staff in working with vulnerable families, child protection. Let's not forget that a private company's main interest is this, making money for the shareholders. Nobody can argue against increased investment in public health. However, we also need to ensure that when we deliver public health initiatives, they are provided by staff who are working for employers whose priority is public health, such as the NHS should be the only provider, and they have the best interest of the public at heart. As a health worker, I get sick and fed up at meetings being told that what we need to worry about is meeting key performance indicators and targets. I'm sick of hearing about targets. And whilst I accept that we need to be accountable, there seems to be more of a priority than the service we give to our clients and patients. This Tory government are fixated on running the NHS as a business, a total betrayal of the principles of Nye Bevan. It is right that the Labour manifesto is committed to increasing the number of health visitors and school nurses to rebuild our beloved NHS as a public service. Conference, good public health services are not just important to address the health needs of us now, but as an investment in the health needs of our future generations.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Delegate. So just while the speakers come up, I'm going to call, I'm afraid, the final two people. So, yeah. So the person in the wheelchair with the red T-shirt, because I know they've been trying to speak in debates. And then the person with the purple folder, and I am aware lots of people want to speak, and I'm really sorry we haven't had more time for debate today, but we're going to be able to debate the other contemporary motions as well, so hopefully lots of people will get to speak in that. And like I said, I'm very sorry that conference overran this morning, limiting our time and cutting it in half for speakers today. Yeah. I'll call everyone from up to back, at the back in the next ones. I mean, other people have come down to the front as well, but I will call people from the back next time, I promise.
Conference, June Nelson, Vice Chair, BAME Labour, and Councillor of Heathrow Villages Ward, London Borough of Hillingdon. Speaking on mental health, even though this is not mentioned in the report, but I will be speaking on mental health champions. Conference, mental health is in crisis. I want to speak in support of mental health champions to tackle this crisis and to put mental health on an equivalent footing with physical health. One in 4 people will experience mental health illness at some time or stage in their lives. This means that it is extremely likely that someone close to us at home or at work has been affected, or we ourselves may be experiencing some form of mental health illness. Despite the fact that they are extremely common, so much stigma, prejudice, and ignorance continue to surround mental health. For Black mental health patients, the stigma is magnified many times over. In addition, many Black people do not get the treatment they needed or avoid getting treatment they so urgently needed. It is harrowing to experience for Black people seeking treatment when so many negative stereotypes and stigmas are encountered as part of their daily lives. Theresa May government has spoken a lot about mental health, but we are expecting more than warm words. At the end of the day, word counts for very little when they are not accompanied by action. We want this government to seriously invest in our NHS mental health services, including in our value members who work with such dedication but without enough support or resources. BAME welcome Labour's public engagement with this issue. We will work with the Labour Party to continue to lobby the Tory government to fund good mental health services, and we will promote the campaign launched by Unison in support of mental health and public champions. Mental health is often exhibited by challenging situations in the workplace. Trade unions have a vital role to raise awareness of this issue through publicity and education. BAME members in trade union are uniquely placed to support a member who may be struggling with mental health in the workplace. I am pleased that Labour has made this a priority issue for the NHS and the well-being of people. But we also need to ensure that proper facilities are available to protect the most vulnerable people in our community. The care in the community provision does not exist for mental health patients. They are left alone to fend for themselves with community care and nursing support. Mental health patients deserve better. Let us give them a chance for a better quality of life and end the stereotyping of stigma on mental health.
Thank you. So this reference back. Well, she wants to make a reference back. Let the person do the reference. This is another reference back. This is a reference back. Reference back?
I think it's an amendment.
You can't amend the document, but you can refer it back to be amended.
Okay.
Part of it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Okay. Roxana Fraser, Winchester CLP. Yeah, I just want to ask if some reassurances can be given to those who suffer with mental health problems. My brother is currently in a PQ unit, which is a psychiatric intensive care unit. And just before he went into hospital, he punched a doctor. And when he leaves hospital, he'll be interviewed to see if he was of sound mind, despite being in a PQ unit. And I have also been interviewed and had a statement taken. And yeah, my concern is I'm just worried about how this might affect people who are suffering from mental health problems, and that can we put something in or make some amendments to protect those who are mentally ill. All right. Okay,
Thank you very much.
you.
Yeah, and that's something the MPF can look at. Jonathan, will you take that away to look at? Yeah. So now someone wants to raise a point of order. Yeah, I said someone wants to raise a point of order. Come forward. Person in the... Oh, don't push each other. There's no need for that. The person in the white, do you want to come forward first, and the person in the red? But please don't push each other. She didn't push. Okay, good. It's good that people are keen. Please.
Hi, Teresa Bettis, Meriden. Can I just raise a point of order, please? Those of us who sit at the back feel invisible. I've been here for all the debates. I've been here through all the debates that have taken place since conference opened, and it's been noticeable that people in certain blocks are not being called. Can I ask the Chair, and I appreciate that Alice has only taken over this afternoon, can you please go block by block to ensure fair representation of the regions?
Okay. Thank you very much. So in this afternoon, when we do the contemporary motions, I'll take the blocks across the back to make sure we get a spread of speakers. That was a very good point. Thank you very much for raising that. And now, does the person... oh, no, we've got the delegate coming to make the speech in the wheelchair, then we'll take the point of order.
Chair, comrades, Dr. Andrew Thompson, Birmingham Ladywood CLP, and the first-time speaker. I'm also proud to be a member of the Central Committee of the Socialist Health Association and a member of Unite the Union. Comrades, I won't take long and I'll be quick, and please save any applause till the end because I won't have enough time. I've practiced as a GP for 20 years in the inner city in Birmingham. I recognise a huge amount of good that was done by the last Labour government, but although there was money pouring into the health service, we in the medical profession knew of the demographic time bomb that was about to hit, a demographic time bomb which was always going to overstretch the health service and did not allow for private profit. There is absolutely no way we had the resources to send any sort of money into the pockets of people like Johnson & Johnson and HSBC through PFI. We cannot afford to do that. We have to provide our NHS by the NHS, free of charge at the point of use and totally publicly funded. I left general practice because I could see that the point at which general practice was going to come, a point which has ended up with the latest crisis in Folkestone, where one practice is going to close and every other practice in the town has said they can't take any more patients. And the Labour candidate called a public meeting to talk about this, and the Tory MP didn't even have the ability to come, was too shamefaced to come and explain the situation. And even the CCG didn't send a representative. I then had a stroke. I came out of general practice, I had a stroke. Now I work in addiction services. I understand entirely what Jonathan was saying earlier. I've worked with people with addiction for all of my professional career, even when I was in general practice. I work in a service that was transferred out of the NHS, a service which has had to cut its budget. It's cutting its budget by 50% in 5 years. We were already overstretched. And now I have members who I represent as convener in that service, absolutely desperate and on their knees, trying to support the sort of people like Jonathan's father, drug users, alcoholics, many of whom are homeless, committed workers who leave in tears because they can't continue to provide a service. We have to take these services back into NHS. We have to do that for the people who work in them and for the people that we serve. There is no place for the private profit in healthcare or any of our social services. We need a socialist society.
Very much, Delegate. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, I think we have a point of order before our final speaker. Folkestone. Power to Folkestone.
So, hi, my name is Marvina Newton. So, point of correction, I was not pushing the other lady, and that assumption wasn't right. When we talk diversity, we need to talk diversity in this place. There are people, we are here as delegates to represent our constituents, and we are sitting here, and it would be nice for us to be acknowledged and seen. Also, let's talk intersectionality. In this conversation, I'm not hearing people talk about intersectionality, about the problems of BME, LGBT, religion, looking at different parts of disability, and yet we are not seeing those people represented on stage, putting their case in front. Apart from the young man that just came up the stage, we need to ensure when you do this, this is my first time being in this conference, I would like to come more, but I want to know that the diversity I see in the crowd actually is reflected on stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Important point. Thank you.
My name's Emma Hodinott. I'm a local councillor in Yorkshire, but I'm also the local government officer for the Co-op Party as well. We're a fantastic growing network of 800 co-op councillors across the country, but also very proud to have co-op MPs like John making the case as well. I want to talk about people. Care is about people. It's about how we look after those who we care the most about. Our parents, our grandparents, our children, our brothers and sisters. But the system we trust to look after the things we hold dear is absolutely broken. The co-op movement was developed over the last 2 centuries to provide a real alternative to the broken markets which work against the interests of ordinary working people. As a movement, we've campaigned for community-owned renewable energy as an alternative. We've campaigned for community-led transport. We've campaigned for credit unions as an alternative to the big banks. But there's never been a more glaring example of the need today for an alternative with some of the social care provision that is happening in this country. We've heard about the scandal of the 15-minute visits, a low-paid and exploited workforce, faceless private companies profiteering from the needs of older and disabled people. So last year, the Co-op Party published our Taking Care pamphlet, a radical alternative vision to the existing social care market. We need an ownership revolution in the social care sector in this country. We've long supported the election of employees onto the company boards, and private sector care providers would be the perfect place to start. That is why the Co-op Party are calling for the right to run, with carers, care recipients and their families have a guaranteed right to representation on the company boards of private sector care providers. Those who provide and rely on social care services, they've got the best knowledge, they've got the passion necessary to give good quality, effective care. And the best way to align those interests and that knowledge is with that mutual ownership, with care right back at the heart where it should be in our social care system. And we know it's already happening in this country. Oldham, Plymouth, co-op councillors up and down the country are leading the way in changing a broken system. So we say it's time to mutualise the private sector in social care. It's time to put people before profit.
So now I'm pleased to ask Barbara Keeley to reply to the debate.
Thank you, Chair, and can I say thanks to all delegates. We've had some fabulous and very impassioned speeches, but particularly thanks to Poole, Weaver Vale and Bladen for seconding the motion and supporting the motion on social care. It is an honour to close this debate as Labour's Shadow Cabinet Member for Mental Health and Social Care. I'm proud, really proud, to have that role in a Labour Party that understands how vital mental health and social care services are, and a party that makes protecting those services a major priority. And doesn't it need protection? We've heard in this debate it's even more important when we see the crisis the Tory government has created in both social care and mental health. And as Nick Forbes said, it's a crisis made in Downing Street. The Tories are failing people across the country. They're failing those who need care and their families. They're failing unpaid family carers. They're failing hundreds of thousands of care workers. People are now going without the care they need. Nearly 500,000 people fewer getting publicly funded care since the Tories came to office. 500,000. Over 1 million older people with unmet care needs, many of them isolated and lonely. The Poole CLP delegate told us about the person with Alzheimer's, lonely, looking after himself with unmet needs. But this Tory government isn't just failing social care users, it's failing their families too. Hundreds of thousands of unpaid family carers are now struggling to balance work and care. and it's failing hundreds of thousands of care staff. Because under the Tories, too often they are underpaid, undertrained and undervalued, and that's not acceptable. Caring staff who are forced to work on 0-hours contracts, denied pay for travel time, underpaid for sleep-in shifts, with care visits of just 15 minutes, prevented from giving the quality of care which people deserve. And the Tory government is failing children and young people in need of mental health services, now denied treatment due to Tory cuts. Young people told they are not thin enough to be treated for an eating disorder. Children who have self-harmed being turned away unless they have made a serious suicide attempt. Thousands of people in mental health crisis being sent hundreds of miles from their families just to get the treatment they need. Mental health services for young people that are now so poor. A High Court judge had to tell Jeremy Hunt that this country would have blood on its hands if suitable care could not be found for a suicidal teenage girl. Conference, it's time for us in the Labour Party to say that this is not good enough. It's not good enough that care quality has fallen, and we've heard in the debate examples of that. 1 in 4 services are now failing on safety grounds. It's not good enough that thousands of vulnerable people are stuck in hospital for weeks or months because there is no care for them at home or no place in a care home. It's not good enough that last winter the British Red Cross talked of a humanitarian crisis. They saw people sent home from hospital without clothes, people falling and not being found for days, people going unwashed because there were no care services to help them to wash. This social care crisis was made in Downing Street, and as we heard, even though it was the Tories that led this, the Liberal Democrats aided and abetted the cuts from social care. Tory governments working in the coalition started cutting billions of pounds from council budgets, and Tory ministers are now failing to find the extra funding needed for social care. Failed budget after budget after budget and autumn statement after autumn statement. And then during the snap general election, Theresa May announced her solution to the crisis. What would it be? A new tax on care, dubbed the dementia tax, hitting people who need care even harder than they'd already been hit, making people use the value of their own homes to pay for home care. Now, this was such a failing and toxic policy that Theresa May announced a U-turn on it within 4 days, and then the Tories quietly dumped that policy. But in its place, the Tories now have nothing to say at all on the future funding of social care. They just promise what? They promise a consultation and a green paper. And on the crisis in mental health for children and young people, which so many in this hall clearly really are very concerned about, they also promise us a green paper. Conference, Labour will fill this Tory policy vacuum. We will show that we are the party that values social care and mental health. And it has to start with the extra funding, which Nick Forbes said that councils desperately need. At the election, we pledged an extra £8 billion for social care in this Parliament, with an extra £1 billion this year to deal with the Tory crisis. This would have delivered, it's important to what we were trying to do with that £1 billion extra this year. This would have delivered paying a real living wage to care staff, paying them travel time and letting them choose regular hours. And that has to be just the starting point for our care staff. It would have delivered finally ending inadequate 15-minute care visits. And it would have helped to ensure free end-of-life care. We had pledged free end-of-life care in 2015, and we pledge it again in 2017. And importantly, Conference, Labour believes funding must be found to pay care staff properly for sleep-in shifts. And I really want to thank Unison for all the work that they've done in supporting in supporting our care staff. Care staff who provide those sleeping shifts have to be paid properly. And Labour will support family carers. We have pledged to increase the carers allowance for unpaid carers to at least the same rates of job seekers allowance. That's only a small first step. We have to recognise the value of the work of unpaid family carers. And conference, a Jeremy Corbyn Labour government will build a national care service. A service in which we pool the risk of high care costs so that no one is faced with catastrophic costs as they are now. In its first years, our National Care Service will receive an extra £3 billion in public funds every year, enough to place a cap on what individuals have to pay towards their care, enough to raise the asset threshold for paying for care, enough to provide free end-of-life care. Now, to act on our pledge, we will invite an independent expert panel to advise us on how we move from the current broken system of care to a sustainable service for the long term. Finally, in mental health, we will increase the amount we spend on services for children and young people. It is a crime that despite their numbers, a very small proportion of mental health budgets do get spent on children and young people. And more importantly, extra funding keeps being promised. We will ring-fence mental health budgets so that money isn't siphoned off by other parts of the NHS. We will bring an early end to the savage policy of patients being sent hundreds of miles for mental health treatment. And we will offer school-based counselling for young people in every one of our high schools. And I really thank the delegate who raised the value of school nurses and health visitors. Counsellors would really help in that grouping of health visitors and school nurses working with our young people. Conference under the Tories, we have seen years of neglect of care needs. Neglect of older people, of younger people, of vulnerable disabled people. This Tory government has now no solutions to the problems it has created. Only Labour will end this crisis made in Downing Street. Only Labour will bring hope to those in need of care and those who care for them. And only Labour will build care services fit for the many, not the few. Thank you, Conference.
Thanks, Lou. Okay. We will take the vote on the health and care report and the reference back at the end of the session. And now we're going to move on to contemporary composites. We'll now take the contemporary composites on housing, Grenfell Tower and rail. So could everyone moving them please be ready so we can do this really quickly to allow as much time as possible for speakers. So contemporary composite 5 on housings can be moved by Tottenham CLP, and could Gravesham CLP be ready to second? And following that, we will take the contemporary composite 6 on Grenfell Tower to be moved by the FBU and the Association of Labour Councillors.
Noah Tucker, Tottenham CLP. The visible homeless, whom it is now becoming normal to see on our streets, are just the tip of a creeping catastrophe. We have families in appalling, overcrowded conditions. We have families torn from their communities, forced to move 100 miles or more, far from friends and extended family, children forced to change schools again and again and again. And the benefit cap and other cuts in benefits are one part, but not the only part, of that problem, that disgrace, and have to be reversed. We also have adults, not just young, moving into middle age, even in professional jobs, forced to live in multi-occupancy, rack-renting conditions, being chased by greedy landlords from one substandard flat to another. We have millions now in our country, one of the richest in the world, who feel that they have no prospect anymore of a permanent, secure home to call their own. The answer, we often hear, is to build more homes. But if those new homes, even if there are millions of them, are unaffordable to those who need them, or even worse, are kept empty by speculators and foreign owners, what have we achieved? The real answer is to build council housing. And I say, and I call on all of us to say to our shadow cabinet colleagues and comrades, do not retreat 1 inch from our policy commitment to build council homes. It's not just the right thing to do. It's not just the right thing to do. It's going to win us the next election. In Tottenham, because we live in a constituency where, in the end, 82% of voters voted Labour, we felt free to travel London and travel the country knocking on doors. And we found on the doorstep building council homes was the single most popular policy on the doorstep. But comrades, what about where we're already in power, or at least in office, in much of the country, particularly in urban areas? Areas where demand exceeds supply for social housing, what do we do? Can I start by saying that some solutions are not solutions at all, but are actually part of the problem? And I mean the kind of regeneration scheme which involves demolishing our most valuable existing resource, our remaining council estates. And when the rubble is cleared, and I have to say this, sometimes not just the rubble, but the existing tenants and residents are cleared, the site is handed over to private property developers whose prime motive is not to build housing as such, but to make the highest profits they can by building the most expensive housing. They promise affordability, but then the accountants go to work on a process called viability, and the affordable housing vanishes like a mirage. I want to thank my fellow councillors in Haringey, especially comrades on Housing Scrutiny Committee, and I'm mentioning Zina Brabazon and Amina Ibrahim, because they and many others have done the work to show that is not the only way. Yes, we must have and can have development vehicles, but they can be 100% council-owned. And now that we have destroyed the Tory majority, they can no longer threaten to block within this Parliament that possibility that we can build and borrow council homes. Comrades, council housing should be for all who need it, housing for people, not profit. And if we keep to that promise, we will not only win, we will deliver.
Thank you, Chair and Conference. I'm Jenny Wallace from Gravesham CLP in Kent. This is my first time at Conference, and may I say, wow, what a conference to be a first-timer at. It is a privilege to be here to second this important motion. Housing is my passion. As you heard, I don't think you did hear actually, but Noah was also elected at a by-election last year. He was elected in September and I was elected in August. From May this year, I have been shadow lead on the Housing Committee in Gravesham. We lost control of Gravesham Borough Council in 2015, but by only 2 seats, and we are sure as XSX determined to regain control when we have the local elections in 2019. Thank you, please, yes, all support. I want to share with you some of the issues in Gravesham. We have some 3,500 people on the housing waiting list, and we have some 5,600 stock of council properties, all full, of course. My casework load has so many housing issues, but let me tell you about a single mum, and I will call her Katie, whose partner left her when her now 2-year-old was a baby. She has been bidding for a council property for 18 months. Her mum has taken her in, but she lives outside Gravesham. Katie is desperate and far from well. When she talks to me, she is in tears. Each weekend she travels to Gravesend, which is the town of Gravesham, to work in a supermarket to earn some much-needed money. I am told that she's a higher priority than a homeless person, but it will probably be still some while before she is successful, so needs to keep bidding. How can it be right that the potential of a young human being is left to stagnate on a housing list with no hope but the platitudes of a sympathetic Labour councillor in opposition? And it's not just Katie who is affected, but also her little one. We must get more houses built. It is as simple as that. However, for formerly homeless people, getting a house, I've just noticed the time, is just the first step, as they normally need significant and complex ongoing support and outreach. This is why it is so vital to defend and improve our NHS, social care and education.
Can you finish up, please?
However, is it right that in one of the wealthiest and most civilised countries in the world, the responsibility for the most desperate and vulnerable people at the edge of society without even a roof over their heads is left to volunteers and charities? May I just say my very last sentence? At the end of the day, everyone needs somewhere to live. Being able to call somewhere home should not be a privilege reserved for the few. Please vote for this motion. Thank you for your indulgence.
So now we're going to take Contemporary Composite 7 on rail and, Contemporary Composite 6 on Grenfell Tower, and Doncaster Central and Peterborough, please be ready to move and second Composite 7 afterwards. We haven't done the policy documents on housing have already been passed. There's no reference backs in this section. This is the contemporary motions, so we've already agreed. You can't reference back motions. We've already agreed the policy documents for this relevant area. I'm sorry, but no, I'm sorry. So, please, if you'd like to.
Chair, Conference, Matt Rack, General Secretary, Fire Brigades Union, moving Composite 6. The 14th of June will be marked in history as a date of nightmare, death and destruction. And everyone in this conference, as millions across the country, will have shared the sense of horror at the appalling loss of life at Grenfell Tower. And what is staggering is that this happened in one of the richest boroughs, in the capital city of one of the richest countries in the world, a country which it appears cannot keep people safe in their own homes. And I think it's correct to term the Grenfell Tower as an atrocity. Now, firefighters, ambulance staff, NHS staff, local authority workers and other public sector workers were on the front line that night and afterwards, starting with emergency fire control staff, not just in London but across the country, who dealt with those appalling calls that will live with them forever. And firefighters were sent into a fire that should never have happened. And I just want to make a point about terminology and language. The press in particular keep referring to firemen. The person in charge of that fire is a woman firefighter who's worked her way up through the ranks of the London Fire Brigade. She is self-evidently not a fireman, she's a firefighter, so please refer to them by their correct profession and title. They are firefighters. Their normal procedures for dealing professionally and effectively with such a fire could not be implemented. And I ask conference to think about this. They very deliberately and very consciously put their own lives at risk. And they did so in order to save the lives of other people. And they saved many lives. But tragically, they did not save everyone. And that weighs heavily with all those involved. And I'm proud to say that almost to a person, those firefighters sent up that tower were members of the Fire Brigades Union. So the next time we're attacked for asking for a pay rise or described as militants, remind those people of people queuing up in breathing apparatus to be sent into that hellhole, and remind them that that is what public service is. That's what public sector workers look like. And by the way, that's what trade union members look like too. Now this conference, the clock's ticking. The conference is right to pay tribute to those people. We saw, and firefighters never use this term, other emergency services never use this term about themselves, but we did see heroism that night, and we saw some remarkable humanity that night and following. We saw a remarkable response from the community around Grenfell Tower, and we should pay tribute to them. But we also saw failure and neglect. Failure and neglect by the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and I have to say, failure and neglect by central government, and they should be held to account about that. It's been said that we shouldn't politicise this event, but I say this, conference, that when we analyse this horror, you will find that what created the circumstances that allowed it to happen is a whole chain of decisions. And those are decisions made by politicians. They are therefore political decisions. And we want this public inquiry to be a genuine investigation. And if it's a real public inquiry, I have to say that government ministers will be summoned to answer questions and to be cross-examined about their role in this. And I give notice to that public inquiry that if ourselves and the representatives of the community conclude that the whole thing is working towards a whitewash, then we will reconsider our approach to that public inquiry and whether we cooperate with it. We need to ask questions about the privatisation and deregulation of building control, of fire risk assessments, the destruction of the fire inspecting role within the fire service, the elimination of publicly funded fire research in the UK, the abolition of national standards in the fire service. We have to look at why housing becomes more and more simply a commodity for the production of profit for developers. We need to look at why local authority funding is cut as never before, the fire service is cut as never before, and when regeneration means forcing out working class communities out of our city centres and into other areas. All these things need to be looked at. And if and I'll finish on this, if prosecutions need to be made, they should be made. But let's not simply look at the person screwing a bit of cladding onto Grenfell Tower. Let's look how this could even happen. And that means examining those at the top who created this regime. If you go to Grenfell Tower, there is huge anger in the community, and it is justified anger. And we stand side by side with that community. We want protection of public safety, decent and safe homes for everyone, and justice for Grenfell. I move.
That's the most fantastic ovation I've ever got in just coming to a rostrum. Thank you. Chair, conference. I'm Judy Billing. I'm the Vice Chair of the Association of Labour Councillors, representing nearly 7,000 councillors across the country. And I'm proud, but also, of course, not a little daunted, to be following the Fire Brigades Union in seconding the contemporary motion on Grenfell Tower. I do want to recognise the other CLPs and organisations who played their part in bringing this motion together. Cardiff Central, Chelsea and Fulham, Norwich South, call out for Norwich South, Twickenham, Central Devon and Chinese for Labour. Labour members from all parts of the country wanting to ensure that the community, which was forever changed on the 14th of June, has the full and unequivocal support of this party conference, and I'm sure that's what they're going to get. I was brought up a few streets away from where the burnt-out husk of Grenfell Tower now stands. As a tiny child in the 1950s, fire engines called to chimney fires were a daily occurrence and a nightly noise in the crumbling homes of tenants of racketeer landlords. My family was one set of tenants. Sometimes people died, but mostly they were saved. This June, I simply couldn't believe that nothing had improved in 60 years, and in fact, given the scale and scope of the devastation, things had clearly got far worse for those in rented social accommodation in 2017. That is shocking. What we saw in the immediate aftermath of this avoidable tragedy was the total failure of Tory local government in the community's hour of absolutely immense need. Conservative-controlled Kensington and Chelsea failed by ignoring residents raising concerns for years. They failed to ensure that help was needed in the community was provided, and they still fail to this day to ensure that families are provided with a decent home more than 100 days from the 14th of June. It's disgraceful. Compare that to the positive leadership shown by Labour Camden and their new leader, Georgia Gould, in just the first few weeks of having taken over from another great woman leader, Sarah Hayward. Georgia and Labour Camden ensured that their residents were not placed at risk, taking action rather than the totally unacceptable lax approach taken by Kensington and Chelsea. Labour authorities, you may not know this, from all around London offered to help, and this was actually refused by Kensington and Chelsea. What on earth were they thinking? We will probably never know. Today, by passing this motion unanimously, we can recognise the tremendous public servants whose response in the fire and in the aftermath was and is truly inspirational. We need a fair funding for local government to ensure that vital safety checks are carried out, and we need to recognise the endemic underinvestment in social housing, so we must lift all spending caps that prevent local councillors and local councils building safe, affordable council homes fit for the 21st century. Conference. The site of Grenfell is close to the difficult place that was my home when I was growing up. So for me, as I've already explained, this is deeply personal. As a society, we must hold those responsible to account and change society to truly ensure that safe and decent housing is available for the many and not the few.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we will now take Contemporary Composite 7 on rail to be moved by Doncaster Central and Peterborough CLP, and then we'll have an unfortunately limited time for speakers, but we will take speakers including for people from the back. So.
Good evening, good afternoon, conference. Afternoon, Chair. I'm Sue Pham from Doncaster CLP, and I'm here to move the motion on rail. Friends, Doncaster is a railway town. We built the Flying Scotchman, we built the Mallard. And its railway workers, the trade unionists from Doncaster, sent the first motion to the TUC, which led to the birth of Labour, the Labour Party. So I'm incredibly proud to be moving this motion. Conference, our pledge in the manifesto was to renationalise the railways. This was the most popular policy. People know that the Tories' privatisation hasn't worked, and it won't work. Fares have rocketed, driver-owners' trains, overcrowding trains, staff losing the job, ticket office closed, and the needs for disabled people are being ignored. Safety is being compromised. We can't put up with this. We can't tolerate this. As a Labour Party, we won't and we shouldn't. Just look at the Southern Railways, how they treat their staff. No wonder there is a dispute, and it is time that the government got its act together. We're not going to tolerate this anymore, are we? No. No. Tory austerity has meant underfunding and underinvestment in our railways, and it's now at crisis point. Chris Grayling this summer broke the Tories' own promise of re-electrification of Northern England, the Midlands and Wales. People in towns like mine are fed up with the Tory government. It's turned its back on us. We're not such a powerhouse, a northern powerhouse. We're going to be known as the northern poorhouse. Yeah. Good public service is the hallmark of a good government and good society. The Tory government is wrecking our railways, and it's time to put a stop to it. John McDonnell yesterday, he said yesterday, we're going to take them back. We're going to take the railways back into our ownership, renationalise them. Well, conference, it can't happen soon enough. Our railways need a Labour Party. Please support this motion. Thank you.
Chair Conference, Jill Murdoch, Peterborough constituency, which in June voted in a Labour MP after 12 long wasted Tory years. A guard on every passenger train is the only safe and sensible way to run a railway. As the Speaker from Aslef said on Sunday, a driver in a compartment at the front of a 12-car train cannot be held responsible for safety and assistance to 1,000 passengers travelling behind. The era of privatisation has worked towards a train being seen as a tin box to churn out profit as its wheels go round. A Labour government, as we know, will recognise that the publicly owned railway is a public service. Private profit has never been a natural ally of safety for either workers or for the public. Grenfell has tragically demonstrated this, as did the Hatfield and Potters Bar crashes in the early days of rail privatisation. A privatised railway is about profits for owners and dividends to shareholders. There is nothing new about that. Indeed, it is why the railways were built in the first place, and historically it did not take long for it to be found out as a bad idea. The Speaker from Community yesterday morning told us that there is a lower percentage of disabled people in work today than there was 30 years ago. A disgrace, but I have no doubt that a similar or worse statistic applies to the number of disabled people travelling on driver-only operated trains. Equalities legislation would suggest that driver-only operation directly discriminates against people with disabilities who are unable to board unstaffed trains, against women who are quite rightly nervous of a de-staffed railway, against anyone who fears hate crimes and racial or sexual abuse. On many occasions, it is the guard who is able to defuse and prevent such horrible incidents. The driver, for very obvious reasons, is unable to do so. A second safety-critical person is essential on every passenger train service, and staff are essential in stations, and this motion commits our party to stopping the rot. Conference. I've been a railway worker and member of the railway union, the TSSA, for longer than I care to calculate. And I can tell you that railway workers are proud of their industry, proud of the work that they do, proud of the safety record on Britain's railways. Railway trade unions will be continuing industrial action against driver-only operation on Southern and elsewhere in the country, as well as against the closing of ticket offices and the de-staffing of stations. Not because they like to disrupt people's journeys, but because they care about the services they run and the safety of the passengers they carry. So, in the same vein that Len McCluskey and Dave Prentice confidently call for solidarity for the struggles to come in their industries, I call on everyone here, including the leadership and shadow cabinet, to give full solidarity to industrial action taken by any and all of the railway unions who are fighting to keep guards on all passenger trains and staff in stations to keep passenger services on our railway safe and accessible. Conference, I second.
Excellent. Okay, so sincere apologies. We're still overrunning, and we're overrunning by about 20 minutes. So I've only got time for 5 speakers. I've promised to call people from the back as well. But we've also had a special request to call the person in the purple from Kensington CLP to talk about Grenfell. I'm going to call the person with the white hair and the red tie, the person with the fire hat, and then at the back, 3 people at the back, I'd like to call the person waving in the red T-shirt with the, yeah, that's you. The person with the blue, is that bunting? Yeah, that's it, come forward. And then there's someone in, with curly hair and glasses waving a thing behind the person with the EU flag. And I'm afraid that's all we're going to have time to call in this debate. I'm really sorry, conference has been really overrunning this afternoon.
6, was that?
Yeah, 6.
Good afternoon, comrades, Chair. My name is Portia Thaxter, and I'm from Kensington CLP. As a resident of the Kensington and Chelsea for 30 years, I can stand here boldly and say the Conservative Party caused nothing but pain and destruction to our residents, and they need to be removed. This brutal, inhumane treatment emerged from the inequality that the ethnic minorities face within our society. I lost 4 friends in that fire: Moses, Khadijah, Mary, and Sarah. 2 survived, Lulia and Ellen. The most vulnerable members of society are still suffering of this society, and we are still suffering the bureaucratic red tape at the top. The Grenfell massacre affected the entire community, and yet still nothing hasn't been done. The trauma that the community faced after having watched their families and friends die unnecessarily is still a lingering tutu. The events of Grenfell Tower have shown that the established procedures and methodologies do not work and are not sufficient to deliver an effective, ongoing response to the disaster. Instead of continuing to apportionate blame and continued failings, what is now required is a collaborative approach between both the authorities and local community. Not one can succeed without the other. The community must agree and set firm KPIs with the established authorities, and the authorities must appoint key leaders for within the community to represent and engage matters. To not take this approach shows a short-sighted mentality and lack of commitment to implementing lasting improvements. We all have a responsibility to ensure that the society learns from this lesson and that we can demonstrate that by our actions and attitudes to empower the community that are suffering. The face and complexion of society has changed, and it is our responsibility, our duty, to make sure it adapts and caters for all of our citizens and not just a subsection of it. And I'm by no means a singular voice. The Conservative government needs to be removed. I will urge every single UK resident to vote them out because they don't have no use. They are not human beings. They need to leave 10 Downing Street.
Thanks, Chair. Conference. It's big this year, isn't it? Looks it, yeah. I'm proud to come here, not just as the President of the Train Drivers Union ASLEF, but also as a member of Doncaster Central CLP, the CLP that sent and moved this motion. So proud of that. Before I talk, I know I've only got 3 minutes, before I talk on the motion, I just want to say that we in ASLEF and all the rail unions recognise the work of the emergency services, the fire brigade union, the police, the ambulance, every rail disaster that's been talked about earlier. They're the people who come to our assistance, and it is shocking, the way that their pay and living standards have been attacked. Now, Doncaster is, by the way, in what is now once again the People's Republic of South Yorkshire with the election. The election of Jared O'Mara and getting rid of Nick Clegg. Every seat is red. So, we're not surprised that Chris Grayling broke promises. The Tories always break their promises, unless it's the promises to bosses and fat cats lining the pockets. Now, Chris Grayling has a bit of an history as well. Speak to members of the PCS about when he was in charge of the Department of Work and Pensions and how he left them in disarray. In fact, don't just talk to the unions and the staff, talk to the people who have suffered with the cuts in the Department of Work and Pensions. Talk to passengers on Southern, on Northern Rail, where they're having to travel around on old rail rolling stock, now to be told that the electrification they were promised is not going to come. The investment isn't coming to the Midlands, and it's not coming to Wales either. They lie. You can only tell they're lying because the lips move. But sometimes they do it in a letter when Parliament's in recess, because they're cowards as well. Are we allowed to use the word cowards in that context? Thank you. In Southern, Chris Grayling and his ideology are behind what's happening there. And also the employer. And the employer is the French State Railway, happy to seek money and take profit from British taxpayers. And the sooner we get that dispute in Southern sorted out, the better. When wages are falling and fares are rising by 3.6%, when East Coast was in public ownership, it had the lowest increases. This year, it had the highest increases in private hands again. We must put a stop to the DOO. We must put people back on stations, people back on trains. And I'll tell you what, we might have ticket machines that can give a ticket out, but they can't get down and help somebody get out of a tube station when there's been an incident, and there's been another one today. And there was an incident in Scotland yesterday where we need staff there. And in Manchester, rail workers, members of ASLEF, the RMT and the TSSA went to assist after that bombing in Manchester. We need staff and we need to be properly funded. Thank you.
Chair. Thank you. Comrades, Jim Malone, Dundee CLP, supporting Composite 6, Grenfell. Comrades, the Grenfell Tower fire was a class-driven atrocity committed by the ruling class against working class. That this atrocity happened in the richest borough and the richest city in the UK is shameful and highlights the blatant indifference shown to working class communities by the establishment. This fire was no accident, comrades. It occurred due to the deliberate imposition of austerity-driven policies by UK, devolved and local governments. This conference must send a clear message to those culpable that they will be held to account. Dundee CLP would like to offer support to the FBU's decades-long campaign to improve public and firefighter safety. We praise the professionalism of our emergency service workers and trust that the soon-to-be-elected Labour government reverse the decades-long cuts to these vital services. However, comrades, action is needed now. The trade union Labour movement must mobilise as never before to demand that FBU have a full seat on a reconstituted inquiry. The remit given to the current inquiry is too narrow and is an insult to the survivors and affected communities. In Scotland, the FBU asked but were refused a seat on the Ministerial Advisory Group looking at the impact of the Grenfell atrocity. Shocking, comrades. Only last week it was announced that 57 high-rise properties in Glasgow had the same cladding as that at Grenfell. Yet the fire service, the FBU, and as importantly the residents had not been informed. This shameful acknowledgement shows the Scottish Government is seriously compromised as to firefighter and public safety. However, the Grenfell atrocity happened on Theresa May's watch. As a result of cuts implemented by her and David Cameron's government, and in London, where the savage cuts were implemented under Boris Johnson's mayorship, there is only one question we should be asking, is when they resign. We would say, resign now. Comrades, I proudly served as a firefighter for 30 years and I'm an active out-of-trade fire brigade union member. That union, I believe, is the greatest in the world. Comrades, support a newly constituted public inquiry, support the manifesto pledge on social housing and support Composite 6. Thank you, comrades.
David Page, from Leeds East, first-time speaker. I've come to talk today about the motion on housing. I support the Labour Party pledge for 100,000 more houses, and I actually believe it should be more. But 100,000 is better than what we've got now. I also have problems with the word affordable, because I'm just a thick working-class guy, and affordable is no real figure. I don't understand what's affordable to you, might not be affordable to somebody else. So we've got to define what affordable means. This is really important to me, because when I was younger, I was homeless. So I know what it's like not to have a home. And I was lucky because my girlfriend or my comrade helped me out, and now I'm married. So somebody saved me. So I've done a little bit of research, because I know people like figures, and I didn't go too far. I just went to the Leeds City Council website and found in Leeds, and this is just Leeds, there are 24,000 households without a home or looking for a house. Just think, 24,000 households, that's not people, that's households. That's men, male, female, women, children. And this will not just be in Leeds. I bet this is multiplied by all the areas that everybody here has come from. I bet in your own area, you will find the same problem. What I'm saying, we need a Labour government now to sort this housing problem out. Problem, I should wear the word crisis, actually. But we can't really wait. I don't think these people can wait that long. So I'm asking my friends from the trade unions or the comrades from there, from the CLPs all over the country, from my friends over here to come up with ideas of how we can campaign, and especially include the councillors, of how we can solve this housing crisis and make a campaign to improve it now. Thank you very much. I move the motion.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Dingsdale. I'm the CLP delegate for Richmond and Yorkshire, and this is my first conference. I am thrilled that the composite motion on building an industrial and economic strategy for all was passed yesterday, and I support the composite motion on rail today. In the climate that we currently live in, with the constant threat of terrorist attacks, it baffles me that some think driver-only services are a good idea, and that getting rid of train guards is not going to affect public safety. I don't get it. Is it just me? And that's why I support this motion. I also want to take the opportunity to draw the conference's attention to the North East. Thank you. An area that has really suffered through lack of infrastructure investment by successive governments. And it's not just about rail. Now, Richmond and Yorkshire might be a beautiful Tory heartland and a beautiful rural constituency, but not everybody there drives a Range Rover. There is widespread rural poverty, and the constant cuts to bus services result in social isolation for many. The lack of high-speed broadband means that those in rural areas do not get to benefit from the digital economy. Looking at the North East more generally, the coalition government and the Tory government coined a great phrase, the Northern Powerhouse. But what does that even mean? I mean, some of the bigger cities might have received a bit more publicity, a bit more funding, and George Osborne got to wear a hard hat. But it's not enough. And it's certainly not helping Richmond, or Middlesbrough, or Darlington, or Stockton, or Gateshead, or Hartlepool, or South Shields, or Northallerton, or County Durham, and Northumberland. Conference, building an industrial and economic strategy for the many and not the few means we should not forget about the regions. Infrastructure investment is crucial in the North East. The North East consistently has the highest unemployment figures in the UK. You walk down the high streets of the towns that I mentioned earlier, and it's just littered with betting shops and payday lenders. Now, I was heartened to hear John McDonnell yesterday set out that Labour will no longer accept the disparities between investment in London and the home counties and the rest of the country, and was pleased to see him giving specific transport commitments for the North. So now, we just need to get the Labour government, Labour into power, and we need to hold John McDonnell to account. And I think that together we can do both of those things. Now, London and Manchester are two of the greatest cities in the world. I do love them. But the UK is not just London, and the North is not just Manchester. And when we formulate policy, we just really need to remember that. Thank you, Conference.
Hello, conference. My name is Paul Thompson. I'm from Stalybridge and Hyde, and this is my first conference. Nice to come from Manchester when someone's just had a bit of a dig about it. There you go. Okay, so I'm here to support the composite on rail. And I first of all want to talk about a bloke you might have heard of called Richard Branson. Okay? Now, Richard Branson is responsible for the rail service I used to get from Manchester to Brighton. And the nicest thing I can say about it was, I'm glad that I didn't have to pay for it. That's nothing against the staff. They do a fantastic job considering their terrible working conditions and pay. But let's just take a quick recap of what happened with Richard Branson. Our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents paid for that rail service. With their taxes, from their blood, sweat and tears, they paid for that service. They paid for it, comrades. And then it was flogged off cheap to Richard Branson, so that basically he's on the gravy train. Sorry. So he's on the gravy train. And what really sickens me is that he is subsidised by the government to do so. He is subsidised by the government to make money and rip people off on a service that our ancestors paid for. And I am sick of it. I'm sick of it, conference. And I will not rest. I will not stop knocking on doors. I will not stop ringing people on the phone until we get a Labour government that brings back all the rail services back into the old style British Rail, completely and utterly nationalised, so all of the problems that we're seeing at the moment with rail workers will never happen again. Richard Branson, the weather took your island. We are taking your rail service back. And Labour is going to be the next government. I move. Thank you, conference.
Thank you, conference. I would now like to invite John Healy to speak on the composites on housing in Grenfell Tower.
Conference, it's a great privilege to lead for our party on housing and a real pleasure to respond to this debate as Shadow Housing Secretary. Thank you, conference. Thank you for making the Grenfell composite your #1 composite, and thank you for making sure that we had a dedicated debate, all too short, on housing. When Matt Rack, Jeremy and I went to Grenfell Tower the morning after that dreadful fire, there were firefighters with over 30 years' service who told us, we've never seen anything like this. And the police chief in charge on site, she described it as truly apocalyptic, and she was right. But this was not a natural disaster. It was man-made. It should never have happened, and it must never happen again. And that's why I've made the pledge to Grenfell survivors and to the public that we, the Labour Party, will not rest until all those who need help and a new home have it, all those culpable have been brought fully to account, and every measure necessary is in place to make sure this never happens again. And today, on behalf of Jeremy Corbyn and the Shadow Cabinet, I want to pay tribute to and thank all those who responded to this catastrophe, to the emergency services who were on site within 6 minutes, worked without rest through the night and then throughout the following day. Thank you. To those who rallied to support the survivors, to the Labour councillors and the local Labour MPs who still speak up for the Grenfell community, especially our great new Labour MP for Kensington, Emma Dent-Coad, thank you. Conference, this is a national disaster and it demands a national response. But when I challenge government ministers, they try to tell me, don't play politics with this tragedy. But it's precisely the decisions of those in power that the survivors of this terrible tragedy want to see tackled. And it's politics when Tory ministers abolish the bodies that Labour set up to guarantee tenants' voices are heard. It's politics when Tory ministers axe Labour's Decent Home programme and they end all central funding for new social rented homes. And it's politics when a government minister, challenged on fire safety measures, says it's not government's responsibility, and then praise as justification their 1-in, 2-out rule on new regulations. Conference, things must change. Things must change, but Grenfell will change nothing without a change of government. And that goes for the rest of housing policy too. You know, since 2010, we've seen 7 years of failure on all fronts under Tory ministers. Home ownership down, rough sleeping doubled, affordable house building now at a 24-year low, rents rising faster than incomes, house building lower than under any government since the 1920s, and new homes for social rent down from the 40,000 that Labour started in our last year in government, now to less than 1,000. And when a country is decent and well off as ours cannot provide something as basic as a safe home for all its citizens, then things must change. So things must change, but they won't change without Labour. We need Labour in government to deliver the big New Deal on housing that Jeremy and Corbyn and I together launched in Labour's Housing Manifesto. To build new homes for social rent, not the Tories' bogus affordable rent. To help first-time buyers on ordinary incomes get the chance to own their own home. To give private renters the legal rights they need. To end rough sleeping homelessness. To get councils building council homes again. And above all, to give people the hope that with a Labour government, things will change. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, John. And now Andy McDonald will speak on the motion on rail.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Andy McDonald, honoured to be the Member of Parliament for Middlesbrough and privileged to be your Shadow Transport Secretary with the task of bringing our railways back into public ownership. Conference, our policy of public ownership of the railways is not about ideology and dogma. It's very simple. You cannot control what you do not own. And the motion before you is an excellent contribution to the debate as we develop our party policy on rail, and I congratulate Doncaster Central CLP and Peterborough CLP for bringing it forward. The composite is quite right to highlight safety and accessibility as two of the most important issues demanding the closest possible attention. Tragic events of recent months in London and Manchester and ongoing security threats only increase the need for safety and vigilance across public transport. And at a time when race hate crimes and sexual assaults on our railways are on the rise, the role of keeping on-board staff is absolutely essential. As we know, many passengers need assistance to board trains, so we need a properly staffed rail network because access to public transport should be a right and not a privilege. The next Labour government publicly owned railway will be safe, accessible and properly staffed. Fares are simply unaffordable and unsustainable, having risen at twice the rate of wages since the Tories came to power. Next year's increase of 3.6% is yet another kick in the teeth for passengers, and Labour will not tolerate this. Our Labour government will use the savings gained from public ownership to reduce fares and simplify the system and introduce smart, flexible and integrated ticketing. And public ownership of rail is not just about rail. Investing in transport connects people and businesses. It creates jobs, boosts skills and generates growth. But this Tory government doesn't get it. It has promised the electrification of TransPennine, Great Western and Midland Main Line for half a decade. But Chris Grayling has betrayed these promises, pulling the plug on investment, condemning much of our country to second-class rail services, denying millions the benefits of long-promised improved connectivity. The Tories now celebrate the advantages of trains switching from electric to diesel when the line runs out. Now they tell us electrification is ugly. That didn't seem to stop the investment in London of the Gospel Oak to Barking line. And if heavier, slower, polluting diesel trains aren't good enough for the South East, then they're not good enough for the North, the Midlands or Wales either. Conference, rail investment is critical to our economic strategy and closing regional divides. This is why we will deliver rail electrification and expansion across the whole country, including a crossrail for the north, linking our great northern towns and cities, and upgrading the network in the southwest, as John McDonnell reaffirmed yesterday. Conference, the Tories have failed rail passengers. They have failed the public servants who work on the railways. It is failing us, all of us, by perpetuating a model that leaks public money at every turn and subsidises rail travel in other countries at our expense. But look, I'm being unkind. The Tories do believe in state-owned railways, but they believe in the German, the French, the Dutch and Italian and others countries running our railways. Conference, isn't it simply bizarre in the extreme that the only nation-state on the planet that is prevented from running the railways in the UK is the UK itself? So, Conference, let's take a step back. What's rail for? The purpose of railways is to move people and goods around affordably and sustainably. It couldn't be clearer. Everyone in this hall knows that the current model for rail is not fit for purpose. It's corporate welfare on an industrial scale, and it will end under a Labour government delivering public ownership. Conference, let's take our railways back. I urge you to support this motion. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Conference. I'm now going to hand the chair over to Glenys.
Good afternoon, Conference. As our final speaker today, I'm very pleased to welcome the Deputy Leader of the party, Tom Watson.
Conference, before I begin my speech, I should say that it has been announced this afternoon that this country has lost two of its finest working class actors, the great Tony Booth and Corrie Queen, Liz Dawn. Both Tony and Liz were great supporters of our party and great servants to this movement, and I know you would like to share your thoughts and prayers with their loved ones. Conference, thank you for being here. Thanks for your enthusiasm, for your passion, for all your hard work. On behalf of the Labour Party, on behalf of our country, I'm grateful to every one of you. Now, last week, the Prime Minister made yet another speech to reboot, yet again, her Brexit strategy. She chose to deliver this latest oration in the great city of Florence, though no one seems to know why. For politicians, though, Florence, even more than the city of Dante, the Medicis and Michelangelo, is the city of Niccolo Machiavelli. So I can only assume that Michael Gove picked the venue. Michael Gove, who admitted last year that he doesn't have the right skills to be Prime Minister. For once in his life, he was right. Trouble is, none of the rest of them have the skills to be Prime Minister either. So now he's back. Now, Machiavelli's famous advice was that it's better to be feared than to be loved. This mantra runs as deep in the Tory party as blue through a stick of Brighton rock. Fear is how they win. Fear is how they govern. It's fear of strangers behind this government's callous treatment of EU citizens living here. It's with the peddled fear of economic ruin that they justify their cruelty to our nurses and teachers, our armed forces and our police officers. It's with fear that they hammer our poorest and most vulnerable, while turning a blind eye to their plutocratic friends. I'm going to be honest with you, Conference. Fear is a powerful force. It won the Tories elections in 2010 and 2015. But this year, something magical happened. The spell has been broken. Jeremy told this country that we don't need to be afraid, that another way is possible, that living in fear is not inevitable. Now, we can choose to live in love and hope instead. And this country, our great country, began to throw off the shackles. Mrs. May, the Tory party was never loved, but you were happy to be feared. It worked for you. Well, not anymore. 15 months in, you still seem as dazed as on day one. Caught between your enemies, and even worse, your friends. Caught in the headlights, living on Boris time. Now, as Shadow Culture Secretary, I've got one of the best jobs there is. When I get invited to the theatre or the cinema or, yes, to Glastonbury, I get to say I'm only there for work. And one of the most surreal moments of my political life happened to me late at night in a field, surrounded by people much younger and far more stylish than me. I realised something as the crowd at Glastonbury's silent disco began to sing, "Oh, Jeremy Corbyn, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, oh, Jeremy Corbyn." Sorry, Jeremy. But as they sang, I realised it's actually better to be loved than to be feared. And Jeremy has shown us that it's possible. Thank you, Jeremy. Now, there are some serious bits to my job too, though. It's not all music festivals and opening nights. Digital, culture, media and sport are the key battlegrounds in our fight against fear and despair. And alongside me in those battles, I have the best shadow DCMS team you could want. Kevin Brennan, my deputy, Rosanna Allen-Khan, Liam Byrne, Steve Reed, Ruth Smeeth, and Will Stevenson. And we've recently lost Louise Hay, the finest mind of her generation, who was rightly promoted to join Diane's team in the Home Office. And we have a leader in Jeremy who stamped his leadership on culture policy when the two of us launched our innovative culture manifesto in Hull. Deservedly the UK City of Culture. What a great job that Labour Council has done in Hull this year. Now, an early priority for our DCMS team in government will be to finally confront problem gambling. Of course, gambling isn't risk-free. Even bets you think are absolute certainties can end up costing you a lot. Just ask Theresa May. Now, that was a gag, by the way. But it's a serious problem. The damage to the families of gambling addicts can be terrible. Yet some gambling firms, driven by greed, are deliberately targeting our poorest communities. We now know that when vulnerable people try to opt out of online gambling, some companies don't always block their accounts as they should. Gambling companies are even harvesting data to deliberately target low-income gamblers and people who've given up gambling. As Mike Dixon, the boss of mental health charity AddAction, says, gambling addiction tears lives apart and families apart too. It's outrageous that an industry with a 13 billion revenue contributes less than £10 million to treatment. Well, Mike, I can tell you that a Labour government will introduce a compulsory levy. And you can imagine the uproar if the drinks industry started targeting Alcoholics Anonymous by selling drink outside AA meetings. We wouldn't tolerate that, and we shouldn't tolerate the same kind of behaviour by some bookmakers. And addicts must be given the help they need. Gambling addiction is an illness, and it's about time it was taken seriously. So I can announce today that together with Jonathan Ashworth, our Shadow Health Secretary, I'm launching a thorough review of gambling addiction in this country and current provision for treatment on the NHS. John Ashworth, by the way, what a sparkling star of Labour's front bench. He's going to be an outstanding health secretary in the next Labour government. Our review will look at how best to fund NHS treatment and help free problem gamblers from the destructive cycle of addiction. So my message to the gambling firms today is clear. Stop targeting vulnerable people. Start acting properly and meet your obligation to help those whose lives have been blighted by addiction. You can do it now because it's the right thing to do, or you can wait for the next Labour government to do it for you. And by the way, the same applies to those organisations that run football in this country. If you won't ban football clubs from signing shirt sponsorship deals with betting companies, Labour will. Now, conference, as I said, I know how lucky I am. I love my job. Serving my constituents in West Bromwich, serving the party, serving you as deputy leader. There's no better job. Perhaps that's why so many people want to do it. But I know that not everyone's as lucky as me. More and more are being left behind by an economy that serves the few, not the many. And the world is changing in ways we can't continue to ignore. The labour market's polarising. Today, choice for too many young people is precarious employment or no employment, a 0 hours contract or no contract, shabby, dangerous, soul-destroying work or no work at all. And income inequality in Britain is amongst the highest in the developed world. Inequality between those with fulfilment and security at work and those without it is growing too. This is a stain on our country, but the Tories just shrug their shoulders and say there's no alternative, just like they did on low pay before our party introduced the minimum wage, just like they did on maternity rights before we secured them, just like they did on healthcare before we created the NHS to treat the many, not just the few. And the Tories are doing it now. They're doing it now. Transport for London has told Uber it has to follow the same rules as everyone else. Nothing more, that it can run its minicab service as long as they respect our rules. Treat your customers with respect and keep them safe like everyone else has to. And then you'll be welcome to make money in London. But Uber, you're becoming the perfect picture of how the future gig economy must not look. Because you may think you're immune because your friends in the Tory party run Britain and its newspapers. You know the Tories don't care about a level playing field and orderly markets. They don't care about consumer protection. They certainly don't care about workers' rights. But they don't run London. And that's where you make your money. And mark my words, they won't be running Britain for much longer too. Because Conservatives don't have the imagination to embrace change. They never have. Theresa May summed it up in a now infamous line from the election. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. So, no lessons learned, no message received. It's the same old Tories, no end to austerity, no change for public servants who deserve a pay rise, no change for the millions who desperately need something different. The truth is the Tories don't really want to change things, but Labour does. And when Jeremy forms the next government, Labour will. A time for change is upon us. The old fear is gone. We're ready for bold, transformative reform, hungry for it. That's what the Labour's campaign showed. And as hundreds of thousands knocked on doors, went to rallies, got out the vote and delivered stunning Labour victories in Tory strongholds like Canterbury, like Kensington, this year's election showed that real change is possible. We can and we will form a radical government which does things differently. We have the imagination. We have the drive. We have the momentum. I thought you might like that in Bristol West. The fight is so important, not just because we need to undo the damage of all those years of Tory rule, but because fresh challenges lie ahead, on the horizon, in sight, in the next few years. Automation and artificial intelligence threatening jobs and wages on a scale the world has never seen. Digital platforms making access to work much more direct and immediate. But the quality of that work, the safeguards, the wages, the pensions, too often these are cast aside, disguised as innovation. Whereas Labour believes that secure, high-quality work should be available for every adult who wants it. And in order to get it, in the digital age, the successful worker will need to be a creative worker. And it's the job of government to make that happen. And that starts with education. In an age when every child has access to all the knowledge that has ever existed on a device that fits on the palm of their hand, just teaching them to memorize thousands of facts is missing the point. Michael Gove's curriculum reforms were a useless return to the past. He was obsessed with what children can remember instead of how they can use the knowledge they have. We don't yet know what the jobs of the future will be. So we've got to teach children not just what to learn, but how to learn and how to be. Self-awareness, emotional intelligence, social skills, creativity and collaborative learning, transferable skills they can adapt as the new world swirls around them. Great schools are places of imagination, inspiration, love. They help our young people become great humans, constantly adjusting in a continually changing world. Such schools are as powerful as the creative imaginations they nurture. They're fabulous places. And let's be clear, they do exist. But let's be equally clear that they exist in spite of Michael Gove, Nicky Morgan, Justine Greening, and all the other names of Tory shame. If it was left up to them, our children would be totally ill-equipped for the economy of now, let alone the economy of the future. Whereas Angela Rayner, our fantastic Education Secretary, she will lead an education system that prepares our young people for a world we can't yet see. Angie talked today about how a Labour government helped her grow from teenage mom into shadow minister. Our education failed her at first, but when she's running it, she won't let the next generation fail. We're all so proud of her, so proud of what she's going to do. That next Labour government will educate and train a nation of workers that are the most creative and adaptable on the planet. We'll give working people the tools to use technology to enhance their lives, not just the digital elite. The digital economy succeeds only when it gives each of us the means to realise our true potential, which doesn't just stop in schools. It must be threaded throughout our economy, throughout our lives. So let's extend employment rights to all workers in the gig economy, the self-employed, agency workers and contractors, as well as the traditionally employed. Let's stop dancing on the head of a legalistic pin about when a job is a job and when a self-employed is not really self-employed. It's a fake fight which big business always wins and Tory governments love to hide behind. So let's put an end to all that and just give rights to people. And yes, in one of the richest countries in the world in the 21st century, let's just make basic employment rights non-negotiable in all circumstances and give them to everybody. Anybody tells you it can't be done, it's because they don't want to do it. They said it about the minimum wage. They said it about maternity rights. They said it about the NHS. Don't let them frighten you out of the rights you deserve. We need to revolutionise our trade unions for the digital age, finding new ways to build solidarity and collectivism. And let's not forget social enterprises, community-focused, people-oriented companies that have thrived since the recession and will be vital to unlocking our future. Now, friends, at last year's conference, I announced an independent commission to look at the future of work. It will be reporting shortly, having done a tremendous job. And I'd like to thank Chair Helen Mountfield and all the commissioners. And this year's conference, together, we rewrote the rules of politics. We overcame fear, and we took the country with us. Using new digital platforms instead of our biased media, we talked straight to the people, and they heard our message. And in contrast to that, last September, Theresa May had a secret meeting with Rupert Murdoch in New York. 9 months later, at the election, Murdoch's papers did their best to start a Tory landslide. They threw the kitchen sink at Jeremy, but this time their dirty tricks didn't work. This time it was not the Sun what won it. And let me tell you, conference, it will never again be the Sun what won it. Winding up my speech last year, I predicted an early election, in which I also said, we're going to give the Tories the surprise of their lives. Well, conference, we did it. Jeremy, you did it. So this year, I'm going out on another limb. Yes, there's hard work to do, and no, we mustn't be complacent. But Jeremy Corbyn has broken the spell of fear the Tories sought to cast on this country. He has helped us all to remember that politics should be about inspiring hope, not peddling despair. He's shown us again what a real alternative to Toryism looks like and what it can achieve. And because of that, I tell you, conference, Jeremy Corbyn will be our next Prime Minister. And in 10 or 12 years' time, this conference will be celebrating the achievements of 2 transformative terms of a Labour government. Abolishing tuition fees and reintroducing the EMA, taking back our utilities into social ownership, renationalising our railways, a £10 an hour real living wage and rising, hundreds of thousands of new council houses, waiting lists down by at least 1 million and A&E waiting times down too. No more Tory hospital closures, freezing the state pension age, free school meals for all primary school children and smaller class sizes, banning 0 hours contracts and giving all workers full and equal rights from day one. That's what a Labour government looks like. That's what we do. That's who we are. Politics now is a fight between those who want to be feared and those who are not frightened to love. Britain's run out of patience with the tin pot Machiavellis. Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Liam Fox, the rest of you, your time is up. The country is ready for change, ready to throw off the shackles, to turn back the side, ready to do the right thing and do the thing right. In place of fear, love. Conference, Britain is ready for Labour. Love wins, and so will we. Thank you.
Shadow Cabinet. Okay. Okay. Can I say thank you to Tom for a brilliant speech, and thanks to the Shadow Cabinet for coming up for the photographs. Thank you very much. We're just going to do votes. Take a point of order, quickly though.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick point of order. I just want to do it now before the vote starts so that we've still got people in the room. Tomorrow morning we've got the policy seminars and they finish at 11:15. Those of us who've been fortunate enough to have tickets for the leader's speech will have noted that it says that we need to be in our seats by 11:30, and that if we're not, that our seats will probably be given to other comrades. Yesterday, it took me 25 minutes to get back into the conference centre, Logistically, I just don't think that's possible, unless, of course, you're going to show the same flexibility in timings that you've just shown to the previous speaker, who was down for 5 minutes and spoke for 22.
Thank you, Conference. We've taken note of the point that you've made. Now we're going to take the votes on health and care debate, okay? So first, the contemporary composite 8 on the NHS, moved by the Socialist Health Association. Can I see all those in favour, please? Any against? Thank you very much. That is obviously carried. Next, contemporary composite 9 on social care, moved by Poole CLP. Can I see all those in favour, please? Any against? I actually think that was unanimous. Thank you very much, colleagues. Next, the emergency motion on assaults on emergency service workers, moved by the GMB. All in favour? Any against? Thank you very much. I think I can only see 1 or 2 hands against. What?
Don't understand.
Just let's carry on with these. It's coming now. Just wait a minute. Next, the Health and Care Policy Commission annual report. The delegate from Bristol West moved a reference back. I assume that's what we're talking about here. On part of paragraph 2 on page 40 of the report. This is from the sentences roughly halfway down the page, which starts, the manifesto has made, to the end of the paragraph. Can I see all of those in favour of reference back? Any against? That's clearly carried. That's clearly carried. Now we're going to take the report as a whole, the Health and Care Policy Commission report as a whole. Can I see all of those in favour of accepting the report? Any against? I do think that is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you. Now we've got contemporary composite 5 on housing, moved by Tottenham CLP. Can I see all those in favour, please? Any against? Unanimous again. Thank you, Conference. Next is the contemporary composite 6 on Grenfell Tower, moved by the FBU. Can I see all those in favour? Any against? Brilliant. That's also unanimous. Thank you. And finally, on this, contemporary composite 7 on rail, moved by Doncaster Central CLP. All those in favour? Any against? Unanimous again. Thank you very much, Conference. Thank you very much. Now, before I make some closing remarks, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to, I would like to first of all thank all the people involved in the organisation of this hugely successful conference. They're too numerous to mention, but thank you very much, particularly all the staff involved. Now, Conference, this has been a really good week for our party, don't you think? We've had a huge number of delegates, visitors and supporters. We've had some really lively debates. It's been pretty exhausting, to be honest, but it's been quite exhilarating. What's been clear is the enthusiasm amongst our members for social justice, the enthusiasm of our members for change in our country, and the determination of our members to rid this country of this shambles of a government. And the determination of our members to get Labour into power and Jeremy Corbyn into Downing Street. Thanks once again for your participation and your cooperation. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. It's been a privilege and an honour to chair this conference. Thank you, conference. Conference, we're now adjourned and to reconvene in the seminars tomorrow morning. See you there.